Time-space detective. A black Ford Crown Victoria emerged at the top of the ramp. It was one of those old-style full-size sedans with no logos, yet still exuding an aura of law enforcement. Right behind it followed a Chevrolet Yukon, a burly sport utility vehicle equipped with a V8 engine, an embodiment of the American spirit. Bringing up the rear at the ramp's summit was a clearly marked van. Painted in striking yellow on its black cargo compartment were the letters CSU, and beneath these three uppercase letters was the full name of the affiliated unit, Pittsburgh Crime Scene Unit. After speeding down the ramp, the leading sedan picked up pace, reaching 90 miles per hour. The convoy of three vehicles cruised silently along Interstate 79 north of Pittsburgh. Stretching endlessly on both sides of the road were the northern wilderness. Weeds and shrubs glinted whitely under the sun. The summer heat blazed down on the asphalt, warming the air above it. Through the windshield, the distant road seemed to be melting and simmering. Even with the air conditioning cranked to the max in the aging Crown Victoria, Nicholas Gu, the lawyer in the passenger seat, was soaked in sweat. He kept dabbing at his face with a handkerchief, but the perspiration kept pouring out. The armpits of his shirt were completely drenched, and the two damp stains were inching toward each other, almost meeting at his chest. This unbearable discomfort was probably due to his slight obesity and the tie he refused to loosen, which clung tightly around his neck. McCarthy, sitting in the back seat, also sweltered under the intense heat, but the temperature was far from his top concern. They had been driving along Interstate 79 at 80 miles per hour for an hour. In less than 30 miles further north, they would enter Erie County's jurisdiction. That meant they would have to notify the local county sheriff to conduct a joint investigation, which would add a world of trouble. McCarthy glanced at Kilgore Trout, the professor sitting beside him. Peering out the window through his thick myopia glasses, the professor wore a serene expression, as if intoxicated by the summer scenery of the northern American wilderness. Detective McCarthy knew full well that every bit of this was an act. The refined man beside him was actually a master of manipulating people's minds, and not a single expression he displayed could be trusted. "Professor, I know what you're worried about, Detective," the professor cut him off. "There's no need for it." Suddenly, he raised both hands toward McCarthy, and his chains and handcuffs clinked loudly. McCarthy instinctively reached for the holster under his arm, while the uniformed officer on the professor's other side had already drawn his service weapon and pressed it against the professor's forehead. But they soon realized that the handcuffs on the professor's wrists were still secure, and the chains attached to his waist restraints were tightly locked. He had only lifted his hands to point out the window. Looking rather sheepish, McCarthy pulled his jittery hand away from his armpit and signaled the uniformed officer to holster his gun with a look. He turned around and followed the direction Kilgore Trout was pointing. Small clusters of trees came into view. "We're almost there," Kilgore Trout said. "Officer, see those groves? That's where we're heading." The three vehicles drove through the woods and parked on the soft muddy ground by an unnamed cove. Formed by tributaries of Lake Erie, such secluded spots perfect for escaping the summer heat were common around the Great Lakes. Everyone scrambled out of the cars eagerly. Even Nicholas Gu, who always cared deeply about his appearance, no longer cared if the mud ruined his polished leather shoes. "Damn this clunker," he muttered under his breath, then quickly took his place beside his client, professional as ever. Before them stood three abandoned vacation and fishing cabins. However, the two closest to the river were no more than ruins. It was clear that the original builders had underestimated the power of the summer floods that surged through the Lake Erie tributaries. The exclusive follow-up team from CBS began unloading their equipment from the Yukon. They set up a satellite dish, and the cameraman lifted his camera to shoot test footage of the female reporter. Sean Myers, the police department's public relations director, and another uniformed officer, who had ridden in the same car as the crew, followed closely behind them, keeping a close eye on their every move. This way, they could control the progress of the interview at any time and prevent any footage that the Pittsburgh Police Department didn't want the public to see from being captured. Although this was the biggest case in Pittsburgh in the past decade, the interview wasn't a live broadcast, so Sean didn't seem too stressed and handled everything with ease. "This is the place," Professor Trout said, still shaken. Fresh fear had once again gripped this northern city. The papers were calling the culprit this time the coin killer. On the desk in front of McCarthy lay a stack of documents an inch thick, weighed down by a brass paperweight. He had already read through the papers under the paperweight once and had no energy to read them again. Most of the documents were autopsy reports and basic information on the 3 victims. He had never been interested in the technical jargon of autopsy reports. As for the victims' basic details, that was something for the field detectives to pore over. They should visit each victim's family, neighbors, colleagues, friends, ex-husbands, ex-boyfriends, first loves, the owner of the cafe they frequented, the supermarket cashier, and keep searching until they found a lead. To his immense frustration, the stack of papers in front of him held exactly 0 clues. Despite the thick pile of various reports, McCarthy had learned nothing about the killer, not even enough to make a single plausible guess. The 3 murders seemed to have no connection whatsoever. They had occurred at different times and places, the first in a restaurant alley late at night, the second in a suburban forest at dusk, and the third in an urban junkyard between 8 and 9 in the evening. The only common thread was the complete absence of witnesses. Beyond being young and attractive women, the victims had no links to one another. They belonged to different ethnic groups and were completely unfamiliar with each other. There was even little chance they had crossed paths in a supermarket. The first victim was a blonde bartender. The second was a single Mexican-American woman with black hair who made a living selling cosmetics online and rarely left her home except to stock up on goods or go fishing. The third was a Japanese woman, a marketing director at a medical device company, and a third, Dan Brown belt in karate, a typical strong-willed career woman. Even their methods of murder varied. The first 2 had been strangled, while the third had been shot. The killer used homemade bullets, hollow point rounds packed with iron shot. These bullets shattered upon entering the body, inflicting massive damage and making ballistic fingerprinting impossible. Bastard. Yet there was no doubt that these were serial killings. Each victim had a coin placed over her eyes, had been sexually assaulted, and her lower body had been filled with chlorine-based bleach. Forensic analysts had identified the brand of the bleach through chemical testing, but like most of their findings, this proved useless. It was a mass-produced product available at any convenience store, with no way to trace its source. McCarthy had a sinking feeling that he was dealing with a killer who chose victims at random. Cases involving roving killers always loomed as unsolved mysteries. He lifted the brass paperweight from the documents, but hesitated to open the file again. A rectangular mark was left on the manila folder. The heavy metal felt cumbersome in his hand, much like the pressure weighing down on him from his superiors. 3 days earlier, Chief Owen had personally called him in. The case had cut short the chief's warm vacation in Florida and forced him back to this gloomy, run-down city. Their conversation had obviously been tense, but that wasn't the worst of it. What worried McCarthy more was the new FBI observer. If the case remained unsolved and had to be handed over to the FBI, his career would likely be over. Even if the FBI failed to crack it, their agents could return unscathed to their offices in Quantico, leaving him to take the blame. And if the FBI did solve it, things wouldn't be any better. City officials would never let a homicide unit supervisor, who had messed up a major case right after taking office, get promoted to deputy chief. He recalled Sean Meyer's words, "But I think we need someone at the supervisor level here. Jason suggested calling you, and I agree you're the best person for this case." Bastard, McCarthy thought angrily. I'm just the best person to take the fall. He slammed open a drawer and hurled the brass paperweight into it. With a loud crash, the paperweight vanished into the depths of the drawer. The commotion from the outer office fell silent instantly. Then the office door creaked open a crack. "The hell do you?" McCarthy's furious shout turned to stunned silence the moment he saw who was at the door. He choked back the rest of his sentence. "Not even knock first. Got a minute to talk, detective?" The visitor held 2 cups of coffee, his tone friendly yet impossible to refuse. McCarthy froze. He should have shown the man the door, but somehow, he found himself nodding. The supervisor's office was a cubicle tucked away in the back of the Robbery Homicide Division's bullpen. A floor-to-ceiling glass partition separated it from the rest of the room, and a brand-new aluminum nameplate engraved with Ian McCarthy slid into the metal slot on the door. For the past 6 months, McCarthy had kept the blinds drawn tight to cover the glass, yet he still couldn't block out the noise from outside. Ever since he moved into this office, the office hubbub he'd once grown accustomed to had started to grate on his nerves. He knew a lot of it was gossip about his promotion. Many detectives thought he'd only become a police star by dumb luck, and that was how he'd landed himself in this damn cubicle. He'd lost some friends because of it. They weren't his friends anymore. They were his subordinates. McCarthy didn't think the change was a big deal, but everyone else did. He'd try to get used to it, but it was harder than he'd imagined. In the stubborn minds of detectives, bureaucrats were even more loathsome than criminals, a fact as unchangeable as a boiled egg never hatching a chick. Once you climbed into that position, no matter who you'd been before, you lost the chance to communicate with them as equals. Compared to that, the FBI agent standing in front of him, holding 2 cups of coffee, was actually a much better conversationalist. "You guys are lucky to have such good coffee," the FBI agent said, lifting his cup and taking a sip of the hot brew in appreciation. "The swill they serve at Quantico could give a guy diabetes." "Cup coffee's all the same," McCarthy replied. Even though his resolve was wavering, he decided to hold off on softening his attitude toward the agent in front of him. The federal agent lifted his eyes from the steam curling off his coffee and locked gazes with McCarthy. The smile faded from his face, replaced by a serious expression. "You don't like me. That's fine. No local cop ever likes the FBI. But if you think I'm here about the case on your desk, you're dead wrong." McCarthy stared at him in surprise. The man was startlingly forthright, skipping all the phony pleasantries and cutting straight to the chase. Yet this candor didn't irritate him in the slightest. Instead, it made him feel like his own standoffishness was unwarranted. He wondered if this was some trick they taught at Quantico. Rumor had it the behavioral analysis unit folks were masters of this sort of thing, and the man in front of him was one of those criminal psychologists. "Then why are you in Pittsburgh?" he asked. The federal agent frowned slightly. "Didn't Chief Owen tell you?" "Tell me what?" "He never invited me or my colleagues to join any case. You know we don't meddle in local police business unless we're asked, especially not for cases that don't cross state lines. The head of the Pittsburgh field office might grab coffee or play golf with the chief now and then, but we're not busybodies. Maintaining local law and order is your job, after all. We don't need the hassle." McCarthy blinked, taken aback, but it wasn't exactly unexpected. Clearly, the chief had used the federal agent as leverage. "That old fox," Ian muttered under his breath. He thought back to 3 days earlier, in the chief's office, when Chief Owen McDonald had introduced him to this federal agent named Jeffrey Adams. "Detective McCarthy will give you whatever assistance you need," the chief had said to the agent. "Looks like we've both been played by the chief," the federal agent said, though he looked utterly unconcerned. "Chief Owen used me to put pressure on you. Don't worry about it. It happens all the time." "Must be nice for you," McCarthy said, his tone softening a little. For a split second, he even felt a flicker of camaraderie with the blond man in front of him. "But it's not every day we get an FBI agent hanging around here. If it's not about the case, then what are you really here for, Agent Jeffrey?" The agent clearly noticed the change in his address. "Agent Jeffrey." A smile tugged at his lips again. "I'm here about Kilgore Trout, the man you folks call the Professor. He's the subject of my research this quarter. I need to review some of the case files on him and talk to a few people. Word is you're the cop who caught him. That's why I'm sitting here." McCarthy let out a long sigh. "Trout? Yeah, I caught him. And we damn near sent him straight to hell, too. But his lawyer convinced the jury he was insane, and he got off scot-free. In my book, they never should have let him get a psychiatric evaluation. Serial killers being sane? That's the real lunacy. Have you read his diary? He wrote down every single thing. I'll bet he planned that insanity plea from the start." "I have. I read all the files before I came. Diary, audio recordings. Did you guys find anything new on his computer later?" "Nah. That bastard encrypted it with a password so long it'd take 200 years to crack. Turns out he's pretty handy with computers. We never managed to hack into it, not even after we locked him up in the loony bin. But for the prosecutors, the recordings on the voice recorder and the stuff on his PDA were more than enough." "I see. Listen, pal, I want to hear how you caught him. The part on the highway, specifically." Now, Jeffrey glanced at the thick stack of case files on the desk, hesitated for a moment, then said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot you're swamped with this case. Thanks for your time. We'll talk later." "Wait a second. Jeff, can I call you Jeff?" "Sure. Everyone does." McCarthy lifted his left wrist to check his watch. "Look at the time. It's already lunch. I know a place with killer thin-crust Italian pizza. Why don't we sit down, grab a bite, and talk?" Agent Jeffrey looked surprised. "What about your case?" McCarthy was already standing up from his swivel chair, draining the last of his coffee in one gulp before tucking the case file under his arm. "We can bring the case with us. I'm tearing my hair out over it anyway. After we're done talking about Kilgore Trout, I want you to take a look at it. Maybe you can give me some advice, off the record." "Deal." Jeffrey stood up too. "Oh, one more thing." "Yeah. Can we take your car? Mine's, got some air conditioning issues." "Absolutely." When the call came in, we were only 2 miles from the scene. At first, the radio dispatch just said it was a routine traffic accident. A BMW swerved into oncoming traffic to avoid a container truck that cut it off and slammed head-on into an Audi Q7. Half the BMW's engine bay crumpled right under the Audi's front wheels. It was a brutal crash. Both cars deployed all 8 airbags. But German cars are built like tanks, let me tell you. The Audi driver, Kilgore Trout, walked away without a scratch. The BMW driver wasn't so lucky. He had a concussion, a few broken ribs from the steering wheel, and passed out cold. Me and my partner back then, Jason, we heard the whole thing go down over the radio. Highway Patrol got there 2 minutes later. They checked on both drivers and called for an ambulance. That's when Trout climbed out of the Audi, pulled a gun, and pumped 3 bullets into the BMW driver's head. Total chaos. We heard the gunshots, the yelling, the Highway Patrol screaming for backup over the radio. Me and Jason hauled ass over there. We got to the scene almost at the same time as the ambulance. When we pulled up, Trout was trying to drive off in his Q7. We cut him off, and he rear-ended the left side of our car. Jason was driving. He spent 2 weeks in the hospital because of that crash and missed out on the case because of it. I jumped out of the car, fired 2 shots at the Audi, and then Trout surrendered. He had nowhere to run. I cuffed that bastard, read him his Miranda rights, and that's when the paramedics from the ambulance ran over to the BMW. They took one look at the guy and called it. His brains were splattered all over the interior. They ran back, moved the Audi out of the way, loaded Jason onto a stretcher, and told me to call the forensics team to come pick up the body. I stuffed Trout into a Highway Patrol car. Ours was totaled, and radioed for the crime scene unit and the ME's office. Then I told one of the uniformed cops to drive us back to the station and kept the other one there to secure the scene. I made a point of telling the cop who stayed to tell the crime scene guys to tear that Audi apart, inside and out. Have you ever heard of someone shooting a guy just because he crashed into their car? Sure, I've heard of road rage shootings over parking spots, but Trout wasn't that kind of guy. He didn't say a single word the whole time. But when the paramedics checked the BMW driver, he looked like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. Something was off about him from the start, man. The BMW was the one at fault. Trout was the victim. He wouldn't have lost a dime. Insurance would have covered everything. So why the hell did he shoot the guy? Unless he'd planned to kill him from the very beginning. The rest is history. We found that so-called diary in his car. He tried to pass it off as a work of fiction, but based on what was in that diary, we found 16 bodies. We linked him to 4 unsolved murders, 2 missing persons cases, and 4 deaths that were ruled accidents. Jesus Christ, it still gives me the creeps thinking about it. Can you believe it? He was a serial killer for 7 years, at least 17 people dead by his hand, and this guy didn't have so much as a parking ticket on his record. Clean as a goddamn whistle. McCarthy paused to take a sip of coffee, and Jeffrey jumped in with a question. If the BMW crashed into him, how could it have been premeditated? How did he know there was going to be an accident right there? We found a GPS tracker on the BMW, and we're pretty sure that container truck that cut the BMW off was part of his plan too. But we never found the truck. There were no highway cameras on that stretch of road, and no one at the scene remembered the license plate. We dug into it and found out he'd bought that beefy Audi Q7 just a week before the crash. But his little plan backfired. The BMW driver didn't die in the wreck, so he had to finish the job himself. Why did he want to kill the BMW driver? What was their connection? We never found out for sure. He clammed up tight during the entire trial. The guy who got shot Jack Daniels was the vice president of a car dealership. Kilgore Trout was an associate professor of literature at the University of Pittsburgh. That's where he got the nickname, the Professor. Can you believe that bastard was a college professor? It makes my skin crawl just thinking about it. Other than the ramblings in Trout's diary, we couldn't find any link between them. My guess is Jack found out about Trout's little hobby, and Trout had to silence him. That diary was a fake, planted there to set up his insanity defense. His lawyer used all that nonsense to argue he was mentally unfit, and that's how he got off. I still can't believe the jury bought it. He managed to stay under the radar for 7 years, then blew his cover by shooting a guy in front of cops? Doesn't that strike you as a little inconsistent? This whole case is full of inconsistencies, Agent. We had enough evidence to put him on death row 10 times over. If it weren't for that godforsaken psychiatric evaluation, you think that was consistent? If it were up to me, I wouldn't have let him take his secrets to court. McCarthy, who'd been pausing between bites of pizza and sips of coffee, suddenly stopped. Are you accusing me of dereliction of duty? Jeffrey held up his hands in a placating gesture. Just saying. McCarthy stuffed the last slice of pizza into his mouth, washed it down with the rest of his coffee, then asked the waiter for a glass of water. He pulled a tube of Bayer Vitamin C effervescent tablets out of his suit pocket, popped one into the water, and watched as the orange tablet fizzed and dissolved. That's when he noticed Jeffrey's pizza and coffee were barely touched. Not hungry. Oh, no. It's great, Jeffrey said, picking up a slice and taking a bite. His words were muffled around the food. I'm just captivated, that's all. You're a hell of a storyteller. I'm not telling stories. Every word of this is true, McCarthy said, sounding a little miffed. Of course it is. I meant you tell it well. Way better than any case file or report I've ever read. Jeffrey took another bite of pizza, then went on. Speaking of files, I've got everything I need on Trout. Now, let's talk about your problem, the case. If you still want my 2 cents, that is. Oh, I do. I almost forgot about it with all the Trout talk. McCarthy pushed his plate aside and pulled the coin killer case file out of his briefcase. He hesitated for a second when he slapped it down on the table. Jeffrey looked at him, his easygoing smile never wavering. That seemed to make up his mind. Even though he didn't exactly like this laid-back FBI agent, he didn't have anyone else to turn to right now. He flipped open the first page of the file. It was a photo of a young woman's body. Before stepping out of the pizzeria, McCarthy switched his phone from silent back to normal ringtone. The screen showed 2 missed calls from the police station's main line. He checked his voicemail, and the Robbery Homicide Division's administrative secretary had left a message asking him to clear an hour of his schedule for a meeting with Chief Owen the next day. It was either about the coin killer case, or some busybody had reported him leaving the station in the same car as an FBI agent. That old fox would never guess that he and the FBI agent had actually become friends. At least, that's what McCarthy thought. The afternoon sun broke through the mist as they walked out of the pizzeria, lending the city a faint glimmer of hope that spring was on its way. For McCarthy, things were finally starting to look up. He politely declined Jeffrey's offer to drive him back to the station, and the federal agent didn't push it. They both knew they shouldn't be seen together again until there was a break in the case. Jeffrey didn't want to get in trouble for overstepping his bounds, and McCarthy didn't want to make his already shaky reputation in the division even worse by fraternizing with the FBI. When McCarthy returned to his office alone, Jason Gregg and Frank Kepler were already waiting for him. He'd called the 2 detective partners, who were actually handling the fieldwork on the coin killer case, on his taxi ride back to the station, saying he had a major lead. He told them that no one becomes a serial rapist and killer overnight. Before graduating to murder, they usually have a history of lesser sex crimes, stalking, indecent exposure, attempted rape. It's only when those acts no longer satisfy their twisted desires that their violence escalates to rape and murder. He told them to dig up the records of every person in the city with more than 1 sex crime conviction in the past year, paying special attention to men under 50 who were good-looking. They were to go door to door and interview each one. And they needed to remember, none of the 3 victims showed any signs of struggle. Serial rapists almost always act alone, and the ME's report confirmed none of the victims had been drugged. The only way a guy could get close to women that attractive without them putting up a fight was if he had a face that opened doors. And another thing, Make Greek men your top priority. McCarthy emphasized. Why Greek men? Frank asked. The coins over their eyes, remember that? It's a Greek tradition. The ancient Greeks believed that before the dead could cross into the underworld, they had to sail across the river Acheron, a river so heavy that even feathers sank to the bottom. No one could swim it. The only way across was on Charon's ferry, and every corpse was buried with 2 coins over their eyes to pay the ferryman for the ride. Jason didn't say a word. He'd clearly figured out where McCarthy had gotten this lead. He'd seen McCarthy leaving the station in the federal agent's big Chevy Suburban, just as he and Frank were pulling into the parking lot in their Ford Taurus. McCarthy was certain they'd recognized him in the passenger seat. At least his old partner Jason wouldn't have missed him. The younger detective, Frank, either played dumb or genuinely had no idea who was in the Suburban. He still looked baffled as he asked, "Boss, where'd you learn all this weirdo stuff?" "TV," McCarthy replied. "CSI, New York." Watching the 2 detectives disappear out the office door, McCarthy let out a small sigh of relief. It wasn't exactly a breakthrough, but at least they had a direction now, instead of chasing their tails like headless chickens. He thought for a moment, then pulled the police department's internal directory out of his desk drawer and looked up the number for the FBI Pittsburgh field office. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Pittsburgh field office. "How may I direct your call?" A cool female voice answered the phone. "Hello, this is Detective Ian McCarthy from the Pittsburgh Police Department's Robbery Homicide Division. I need to speak to an agent in the Organized Crime Unit." "One moment, please. I'll transfer you." After a series of hold tones, a man's voice with a Midwest accent came on the line. "Paul Lederman." "Agent Lederman, this is Detective Ian McCarthy of the Pittsburgh PD Robbery Homicide Division. Sorry to bother you, but I need some information." "What kind of information?" The man sounded clearly surprised by the call. "I'm sure you've heard about the serial rape murders in the city lately. That's what I'm calling about." "Oh, I've heard about it, Detective, but I haven't received any requests for a joint task force." "This isn't about a joint task force. I just need some background info. Off the record, just a verbal confirmation." "Agent Adams said I could call." "BAU's Jeffrey Adams? You two are friends." "We've worked together on a couple of things," McCarthy lied. "I don't know him very well, but all right. What do you need to know?" "Simple. I just want the lowdown on Greek gangs in the city." There was a 10-second silence on the other end of the line. McCarthy heard the clack of keyboard keys, then the federal agent's response. "From what I've got here, there are no Greek gangs in this city. I think you might be barking up the wrong tree." "Are you sure?" "Positive. There aren't that many Greeks in the U.S. to begin with, and they almost never form gangs. Never heard of a Greek gang in my life. Thanks for your time. Sorry to bother you." McCarthy hung up the phone, feeling disappointed. He'd been hoping to get a lead from the Greek community, the same way you could always dig up info on Japanese or Chinese suspects from their respective gangs. But the Greek angle had turned out to be a dead end. It looked like he was stuck waiting for Jason and Frank's investigation to pan out. Thinking about his meeting with the chief the next day, McCarthy's mood soured again. Should he tell the chief about the Greek lead? If Jason and Frank came up empty-handed, bringing up this unsubstantiated clue would only make him look bad. But he also knew that stonewalling the chief wouldn't get him anywhere. If the chief decided to bring in the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit on the case, he'd be shooting himself in the foot. Better to try to delay the meeting, see if Jason and Frank turned up anything. McCarthy ran his left hand through his hair, messing it up even more, then picked up the phone again. "McCarthy residence. Who's calling?" His wife answered on the second ring. "Laura, it's me. I'm going to be late home tonight. Don't wait up for dinner." "Working late again?" "You know how it is. This serial killer's got the whole city on edge." "All right. Should I save you some food? What are you guys having?" "I looked at 2 houses today. Catherine's starting middle school soon, and I want to move to a neighborhood with better public schools. I didn't have time to make dinner, so I was thinking of getting pizza for the kids. They love it." "Oh, and how's that contract coming along? I want to know if we can afford to send the kids to private school." "Save me a slice, will you? I won't be too late. We'll talk about the rest when I get home." McCarthy avoided answering her question about the contract. "Be careful out there, Ian. I love you. I love you too." McCarthy hung up the phone, feeling a twinge of guilt about the lie. The truth was, as head of robbery homicide, he didn't have to work overtime. Jason and Frank would have the list of suspects on his desk first thing in the morning. Even though he barely spoke to Jason since his promotion, his former partner was still one of the few people in the bullpen he trusted. Jason could be stubborn as a mule, but they'd been friends for almost 10 years, 9 of them as partners. Even though he'd gotten the promotion before Jason, even though they hadn't grabbed a drink together in ages, their friendship was still solid. At least, that's what McCarthy thought. He just didn't want to go home. The house was losing its appeal, bit by bit. He knew he still loved his wife, still loved his kids, but a strange sense of distance was growing between him and Laura. They hadn't slept together in a month. The bullpen had gone eerily quiet without his noticing. McCarthy parted the blinds and peered out into the open office. It was completely empty. He checked his watch. It was already 6:15. He opened the door to his office, grabbed his coffee mug, and walked over to the water cooler, filling it to the brim. Then he pulled the tube of vitamin C tablets out of his pocket and dropped one into the water. Sometimes he hated this ridiculous dependency. It was a holdover from his parents' misguided nutrition plan when he was a kid. If he didn't get at least 3,000 milligrams of vitamin C a day, he'd start showing symptoms of scurvy in no time. He usually drank a glass of the fizzy orange stuff before work, another when he got home, and one more before bed. He always kept a tube of the tablets on him for emergencies, but he never drank it in front of his colleagues. He didn't smoke, and he rarely went to the bar with the guys. That was already considered a sign of weakness in the robbery-homicide division. If the others found out he was hooked on this silly-tasting drink, he'd be the laughingstock of the entire department. McCarthy sighed and chugged the orange fizz in one gulp. If he could go back in time and do it all over again, he wouldn't wish for lottery numbers or apologize to that pretty girl he'd dated in college. He'd wish he'd never taken that damn vitamin C. But now he was like a frog being slowly boiled alive, too late to jump out of the pot. At exactly 8 o'clock, McCarthy walked out of the police station, his mind heavy with thoughts. He slid into his old Mercury, started the engine, pulled out of the station parking lot, and turned onto the road leading away from home. By day, Pittsburgh didn't look half bad. But as soon as the sun went down, the city's decay, its identity as a forgotten industrial town, became impossible to ignore. The streets were empty under the dim yellow streetlights. McCarthy drove the Mercury for nearly a mile before seeing another person. But like every other American city, there were corners that only came alive after dark. Before he knew it, he'd driven past 51st Street. Beyond that lay the worst neighborhood in the city for crime. By the time he realized where he was already on 57th Street, the heart of the red light district. He slammed on the brakes. As soon as the car slowed down, a swarm of prostitutes descended on it, their half-naked bodies pressing against the windows. McCarthy's eyes widened, and he hit the gas hard. What the hell am I doing here? He thought, loosening his tie and unbuttoning the top button of his shirt. He turned left at the intersection, merging onto Vermont Street. Purple and red neon signs flashed in his eyes, and he slowed down again. The detective drove his beat-up Mercury around the red light district for 2 full loops, but he never stopped the car. When he finally turned onto Norfolk Avenue, heading for home, he pulled over to the side of the road, adjusted the rearview mirror, and buttoned his shirt back up, tightening his tie again. When McCarthy got home, his wife was still awake. He turned the key in the lock, and Laura appeared in the hallway, wearing her pajamas. "You're home late, honey," she said, walking over to take his briefcase and setting it down in the corner by the door. "Blame the case," McCarthy replied, kissing her. "Are the kids asleep?" "They are. Catherine went to bed at 8:30. Little Stuart stayed up waiting for you. He got on his volcano project. I checked on him a little while ago, and he was out cold." McCarthy mumbled, distracted. He took off his suit jacket, pulled off his tie, and unbuttoned the top button of his shirt, letting out a long sigh of relief. Finally, he felt like he could breathe again. "There's pizza in the fridge, cheese and bacon. Want me to heat it up for you?" Laura walked into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. The pale white light from the fridge illuminated her curvy figure, making her look surprisingly sexy. "No, I'm not hungry. Tell me about the houses you looked at today." McCarthy walked up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, his fingers brushing against the soft flesh of her stomach. Laura put down the pizza box and reached back to hold his arms. McCarthy's hands began to wander, his left moving up, his right sliding down. "Oh," she moaned, turning to face him. Before she could make another sound, McCarthy pressed his lips against hers. McCarthy was jolted awake by the loud ding of the microwave timer. His alarm clock had failed to go off again. He grabbed the digital clock off his nightstand, but in his sleepy fumbling, he knocked the power cord loose. The screen went black before his bleary eyes could make out the numbers. Damn it! Downstairs, he heard the clink of silverware against plates and the sound of the kids arguing. McCarthy pulled on his bathrobe, wiped his face with his hand to rub the sleep out of his eyes, and ran his fingers through his hair, pushing it back from his forehead before heading downstairs. "Hey, honey, you overslept. The kids are about to leave for school." Laura was clearing the dishes off the table as she called toward the front door. "Kids, come say goodbye to your dad before you go." "I'm gonna miss the bus, Mom." "Bye, Dad." Little Stuart's voice faded as he ran out the door. Catherine, however, turned back and gave McCarthy a quick kiss on his left cheek. "Bye, Mom. You need to shave, Dad." McCarthy stood up straight and ran a hand over his chin and jaw. "I swear I just shaved yesterday," he thought, though he wasn't entirely sure. But he quickly brushed the trivial thought aside. The microwave dinged again, and Laura pulled out his portion of breakfast. McCarthy walked over to her as she held the plate in one hand and a glass of milk in the other, wrapping his arms around her waist. Laura set the plate down and kissed him, and McCarthy took the opportunity to give her but a playful squeeze. Laura gasped, nearly spilling the milk in her hand. "Not here. The front door's still open." "You were amazing last night." "What are you talking about?" The police station might as well have been a cursed place. The second McCarthy turned his Mercury onto Jefferson Avenue, where the station was located, the last lingering warmth from the night before vanished without a trace. He was still driving that beat-up Ford, the defroster still broken, but the weather was even colder than it had been a week ago, freezing cold. What the hell was wrong with this city? He'd never gotten around to buying that Mercedes-Benz C300 he'd been coveting for so long, either because he was too busy or too stressed. His wife wanted a nicer neighborhood, a bigger house. They wanted to send the kids to private school. But today, his meeting with the chief would decide whether any of that would ever happen. McCarthy glanced at the clock on the dashboard, 9:15. He couldn't remember if the clock was 15 minutes slow or 25, but either way, he was late. He reluctantly pressed down on the gas pedal a little harder. As he prepared to slow down and turn into the station parking lot, McCarthy spotted the chief's Lexus driving toward him in the distance. So when the security guard opened the automatic gate, he slammed on the gas, swerving his old Mercury roughly into the lot and heading straight for the new assigned parking spot in the corner, the one marked, "I am Detective." Ever since last week, he didn't have to worry about showing up late and having to park on the street. It was probably the only good thing that had happened to him all morning. To McCarthy's surprise, the conversation started the moment they stepped into the elevator together. When the chief came running toward the elevator, waving for Ian to hold the door, he'd been tempted to pretend he didn't see him, pull out his phone and fake a call while letting the doors close. But he'd hit the open button just in time. "Morning, Ian." The chief seemed to be in a good mood. "Had something happened?" "Morning, Chief," McCarthy replied. "You're late," the chief said, lifting his wrist and tapping the face of his watch with a smile. "You know how bad the morning traffic is," McCarthy shrugged. "This isn't exactly a great start." "What?" McCarthy thought he'd misheard. "Not a great start? What did that mean?" "That was something you said on a Monday." "Ian, how long have you had that Mercury?" "Going on 12 years now, I think." Why was he asking this? That old fox must have heard something. McCarthy felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "Well, I think it's time for an upgrade." McCarthy's skin crawled at the words. He was more certain than ever that the chief knew something he didn't. He instantly regretted sharing the elevator with him. He should have let the doors close. The chief seemed to be hinting at something. Had his contract fallen through? Was he mocking him for hitching a ride with the FBI agent? Or had he found out about McCarthy test driving that Mercedes 3 weeks ago? He had a bad feeling about this. He'd been wanting to buy a Mercedes for years. When he was promoted to head of robbery homicide, it had felt almost within reach. But now, the coin killer had ruined everything. If he bought that Mercedes now, chances were he'd lose his job as division chief before he finished paying off the loan. "I was going to talk to you about this in my office." But since it's just us two. The chief was still smiling. Old fox. McCarthy cursed silently. Congratulations, Detective Ian McCarthy, the chief said, extending his hand. You've been officially promoted to supervisor of the Robbery Homicide Division. McCarthy froze for a full 30 seconds. By the time he snapped out of his daze, the chief had already stepped out of the elevator, and the doors had closed in front of him. The elevator continued to climb to the top floor before starting its descent. McCarthy pressed the button marked 3. When he stepped out of the elevator on the 3rd floor, he was immediately greeted by old Malcolm, his first partner when he'd been on patrol, and also the chief's brother-in-law. Malcolm walked over with a wide smile and pulled him into a hearty hug. Congratulations, partner. Seeing McCarthy standing there, dumbfounded, Malcolm shook his hand vigorously. You haven't heard? The whole station's talking about it, old man. You've been promoted to supervisor of robbery homicide. The official announcement's this afternoon, but you know how Mary, the chief's wife, my sister, loves to gossip. So there are no secrets in this department for me. Thanks, McCarthy said, forcing a smile. He didn't look surprised or happy. He felt like he was trapped in a replay of the past. Déjà vu. He remembered the French word for it. But had anyone ever experienced a déjà vu this vivid, this long-lasting? He didn't know. The entire bullpen had started to gather around them. People were coming up to shake his hand, offering their congratulations with fake smiles, while the crowd standing farther away whispered among themselves. McCarthy mechanically repeated, "Thank you. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it," as he pushed through the crowd toward the administrative secretary's desk, and stood up and gave her new boss her warmest smile. "Good morning, sir. Congratulations. It's your lucky day. What's the date today?" "Pardon," and stared at him, completely caught off guard by the question. She must have thought she'd misheard him. "What's the date today, Ms. N?" McCarthy repeated. "December 3rd, sir, and it's not April Fool's Day." She'd expected her new supervisor to respond with a friendly, "Thanks for the heads up, Ms. N," or at least a big smile, as a reward for her little joke. Instead, all she got was McCarthy's look of utter disbelief and a quiet whisper. "Oh my God." At first, what haunted me were just scattered fragments of memory, like the déjà vu everyone experiences now and then. I suspected they were just hallucinations, so I went to see a psychologist. My therapist suggested I write down these so-called memories of the future. But keeping a journal didn't improve my condition. It only made it worse. The replays became clearer and clearer, and time and again, they turned out to be true. I stopped doubting my sanity then. Something extraordinary was happening to me. This was no hallucination. It's been a year since I started documenting everything, and I've come to understand what's happening to me on a deeper level. I don't have the ability to see the future. Time itself is reversing. I call this phenomenon a time quake. I must record every detail with increasing precision. It might even win me a Nobel Prize. No, not the literary prize I'll never get. 6 months ago, I began teaching myself physics. I'm convinced that the time quakes are caused by a glitch in the space-time continuum. The universe, which has been expanding non-stop since the Big Bang, suddenly contracts, for lack of a better word. It's like the universe shivers, and time turns backward. Funny enough, time quake was just a term I came up with on a whim, but now it seems eerily fitting. The contraction happens instantaneously and uniformly, so there's no detectable blue shift to prove it occurred. This mysterious phenomenon is hidden from human eyes by God himself. As for why and when time quakes happen, those are questions only the universe can answer. My role, as an observer, is simply to record it all. Though time quakes are mysterious, they do follow a pattern. So far, the longest time quake I've documented reversed time by 151 days, and the shortest by 6 minutes. The intervals between them range from as long as 2 years, 1 month, and 9 days to as short as a single week. But the time reversed in the next quake never goes beyond the point when the previous one occurred. And I'm certain that keeping a journal truly helps preserve the memories that should be erased by the quakes. Through practice, I can now retain almost all of my memories from the period affected by the time quake. For most people, however, time quakes don't even exist. The so-called scientific explanation for déjà vu, that it's a temporary malfunction of the hippocampus, is pure nonsense. My colleagues who work in the natural sciences are always spouting that kind of garbage to secure their research funding. I know that all too well. What's worth noting is that even without the practice of journaling and recollection, anyone can easily detect the existence of time quakes, provided an observer like me tells them about it and proves it's real. I once spent 3 consecutive days talking to an insurance salesman about the wonders of time quakes, eating breakfast with him at the same diner every morning. In the time quake that followed, he won $10 million in the lottery. I saw his name and photo in the newspaper. After that, he never showed up at the diner again. I guess he moved somewhere nice, San Diego or Santa Fe, maybe, to enjoy his winnings and stay far away from me. I need to be more careful about who I talk to from now on. I'm almost certain that I'm not the only person in this city who's aware of time quakes. And that's the first time time quakes have ever made me feel truly afraid. In 3 out of the 6 time quakes I've recorded, I noticed discrepancies between the news and the newspapers and my own memories. All of them related to accidental deaths. Now I'm sure those weren't mistakes in my memory. Someone is changing what has already happened. This time, a 16-year-old girl named Amelia has gone missing. She was supposed to die in an accident the next day when a store sign collapsed during renovations. God help us. Someone is killing people who were supposed to die of other causes. He's taking over the role of death. I've been keeping an eye on this killer for 7 years. His name is Jack Daniels. 7 years ago, he was just a salesman. Now he's the vice president of Alamo Rent-A-Car's Pittsburgh branch. Every week, I go through the trash to collect the newspapers he throws away. He always tears out the pages with obituaries and death notices. That's how I can predict who his next victim will be. Sometimes he chooses his targets from TV news or online reports. During the last time quake, I snuck into his study and garage while he was out of town, installing 2 Trojan programs on his computer and a GPS tracker on his BMW. Even so, I still can't figure out how he kills. His methods have become increasingly sophisticated. He's using his ability to foresee the future to plan his actions to perfection. This man is almost the perfect serial killer in history. No motive, no signature, and no one can figure out how he chooses his victims. In other words, no one can connect the dots between these cases. Fortunately, he hasn't crossed the line yet. All his victims were destined to die anyway. That's why I can't bring myself to take further action. Sometimes I can't help but wonder, does killing someone who's already fated to die count as murder? Those people were going to die sooner or later, and he always manages to get away with it. Maybe it's God's will. Jack Daniels died in a car crash on June 30th. I thought God had finally punished the man who defied him. But fate had other plans. An unexpected time quake brought him back to life, reversing time by 26 days. He'll definitely find a way to cheat death this time. But I won't let him. It's time for him to go to hell. On June 20th, he bought a new BMW 530i and had it reinforced, which is completely out of character for him. I'll have to plant a new GPS tracker on it. Jack Daniels is still planning to drive onto Interstate 7 on schedule, just like before. That arrogant bastard thinks he can challenge God, challenge death. But he'll never see me coming. Kilgore Trout's diary and audio recordings ended here. This was the complete version, stored on the computer in McCarthy's home. The version he'd handed over to the prosecutor had been edited. He deleted all the ramblings about time quakes. As the only detective in charge of that sensational case, Jason Gregg had the bad luck to be stuck in the hospital for 2 weeks, and by the time he'd been discharged, the case was already closed. In the end, he'd only gotten a Medal of Commendation. Doctoring the evidence had been child's play. From the very first second he'd read this, McCarthy had known this case would be his ticket to the top. He'd become a star because of it. That night, he'd interrogated Kilgore Trout alone, using some unconventional methods he'd picked up over 15 years on the force, methods that had proven effective time and time again. And the killer locked in that interrogation room was nothing more than a college professor. It hadn't taken long for Trout to break down and start talking. But unlike most criminals, he hadn't immediately asked for his lawyer. Instead, he'd begun to tell McCarthy the story of time quakes and the serial killer he'd imagined. For 4 hours, McCarthy had listened to the most detailed, most bizarre confession of his entire career as a cop. Not that he'd believed a single word of it. Deleting all references to time quakes from the evidence had probably been the most absurd, most risky gamble of his life. But he'd won big. At 1 o'clock in the morning, after finishing his story, Trout had called his lawyer, Nicholas Gu, one of Pittsburgh's most famous criminal defense attorneys, as if he'd been expecting this day to come all along. An hour later, Nicholas Gu and Detective McCarthy had struck a strange deal in the interrogation room. McCarthy would suppress all evidence related to time quakes, and in exchange, Trout would reveal the locations of all the remaining bodies that hadn't been found. He would also plead guilty to all charges in court and waive his right to appeal, no matter what the verdict was. It was a suicide pact of a deal. The only reason McCarthy had agreed to it was that without Trout's ramblings, there was no concrete evidence linking him to all those murders. The deal had all but buried Trout alive. Well, almost. The only loophole had been the timequake stuff. If Trout's lawyer was smart enough, he could use it to argue that Trout had been legally insane at the time of the killings. It seemed the serial killer actually believed all the nonsense he'd written in his journal. And the fact that a seasoned old fox like Nicholas Gu had gone along with it was truly mind-boggling. There had been a small hiccup in the end, though. The judge and jury hadn't sentenced Kilgore Trout to death by lethal injection. Instead, he'd been sentenced to life in a maximum security psychiatric hospital without the possibility of parole. McCarthy had underestimated that chubby Chinese-American lawyer who always kept the top button of his shirt fastened. Even with only the edited version of the diary and audio recordings to work with, Gu had used his silver tongue to get Trout off death row. 10 days after the verdict, McCarthy had led 3 police officers, Public Relations Director Sean Myers, the exclusive CBS News crew, and a team of crime scene investigators to 3 burial sites, following Trout's instructions. They'd found the bodies of the 16 remaining murder victims mentioned in the diary. Rumor had it that CBS had paid the Pittsburgh Police Department $200,000 for the exclusive rights to the story. Overnight, the name Ian McCarthy had become synonymous with hero cop across Pennsylvania. The position of detective supervisor had been his for the taking. McCarthy let out a long, deep breath, but the weight on his chest didn't lift one bit. Oh my God, every word that bastard said was true. He'd thought he hadn't believed a single word of Trout's timequake nonsense. But the proof was staring him in the face. The date displayed in the bottom right corner of his computer screen read, December 4th, 2008, 12:01 a.m. Time had reversed by 3 months. He was no longer so sure of his own convictions. Maybe deep down, he'd believed Trout's story from the very beginning. What he wanted more than anything right now was to book a flight to Boston first thing in the morning to go talk to Kilgore Trout at Ashcliff Hospital for the Criminally Insane, located on Shutter Island, off the coast of Boston. But he couldn't. There was a serial killer out there, waiting to strike again. Ian McCarthy, he told himself. You're the only one who can stop him. The first murder finally happened, right on schedule. The day after it occurred, following standard procedure, Frank called the victim's only close relative, her roommate, to notify her to come identify the body. The woman who arrived to identify the body was named Eileen. She was no longer young, yet she still dressed like a woman in her 20s. But no amount of makeup could hide the toll that time had taken on her. She looked extremely nervous, her hands clutching the straps of her backpack so tightly that her knuckles whitened, and she seemed as if she might collapse at any moment. McCarthy started to worry that he might have to call an ambulance for her. When the forensic examiner lifted the white sheet to reveal the victim's face, Eileen suddenly covered her face with both hands and let out a soft gasp. My God, is this her? Frank, the young police officer, asked from the side. She nodded repeatedly, and soft sobs escaped her lips. Tears streamed down her cheeks, leaving 2 dark streaks through her makeup. Are you certain, ma'am? McCarthy pressed. Miss, she corrected him sharply. It's Stella. I'm sure of it. Just 3 days ago, I went with her to get this beautiful blonde hair dyed. Oh my God. A thought sparked in McCarthy's mind. Miss Eileen, you said her blonde hair is dyed. Yes. At that hair salon at the end of Knox Street. The Kingfisher Hair Studio, that's the name. I remember it clearly. Their work is great, and the prices aren't expensive either. What color was her natural hair? McCarthy cut off her rambling. Black. Just like her eyes, jet black. Damn it. McCarthy felt a surge of frustration. He couldn't believe he hadn't thought to lift the victim's eyelids to check the color of her eyes. Blonde hair paired with black eyes was obviously a mismatch. Now he understood why the killer had chosen these victims. He pulled a ballpoint pen and a memo pad from the inner pocket of his suit. On the page labeled DK, short for Dime Killer, he wrote, "Black eyes, black hair." He closed the pad, hesitated for a moment, then flipped back to that page. Next to the note about the eyes and hair, he wrote Greek and drew a big question mark beside it. The forensic examiner covered the body again. Eileen had stopped sobbing, but she still looked like she was about to pass out. Frank rushed to support her, and she kept muttering under her breath, "Oh God, Jesus Christ." "Miss Eileen," McCarthy called out to her. "Oh, I'm sorry, officer," she replied, snapping back to her senses. "I think we should move to another place. I have a few more questions to ask you," McCarthy said. "Of course, officer." She roughly wiped the tears from her face, which only made her look more disheveled. Frank helped her walk out of the mortuary. When they passed the restroom, Eileen went inside to clean herself up. When she emerged, all traces of makeup were gone from her face, and she looked much better. Instead of taking her directly to the interrogation room, McCarthy asked the young detective to lead the middle-aged woman to his own office. It was against protocol, but the detective didn't want to put this distraught woman in the cold, impersonal interrogation room. He knew full well that their chances of catching the Dime Killer before he targeted his next victim depended entirely on what this woman could tell them. "Are you ready, Miss Eileen?" McCarthy sat in his chair, leaning forward with his hands folded on the desk. A tape recorder lay on the table, and Frank, sitting beside him, pulled out his PDA, ready to take notes on the key points of the questioning. "Yes, officer," the blonde woman replied. She adjusted her posture, tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, and signaled that she was ready. "Very well. Let's start with your relationship with the victim." McCarthy pressed the record button on the tape recorder, and the tape began to spin. "What is your relationship with Stella?" "We worked as waitresses at the same restaurant, Jack's Premium Steakhouse. We got along really well. I lived alone, so I asked if she wanted to move in with me. She thought it was a great idea, so she moved into my rented apartment and split the rent with me." "So you were colleagues and roommates. How long have you lived together?" She tilted her head, thinking hard. "Almost 2 years now." "Where was she from? Do you know her full name?" The crime scene by the stream looked so authentic that it was nothing short of a genius plan. The flowing water would erase any traces of the body being moved. And once the police assumed this was the original crime scene, the other side of the stream would become a psychological blind spot. No one would ever suspect there was another crime scene across the water. No one, that is, except McCarthy, who had traveled back in time through a timequake. This new insight breathed fresh life into the previously dead-end case. McCarthy was convinced that this clue would lead him straight to the serial killer. He was determined to change the outcome, to save the life of the third victim, and in doing so, to save his own. Otherwise, what was the point of this timequake happening at all? The weight of the body had left extremely clear footprints from a pair of size 10.5 waterproof rubber boots, the kind commonly used by gardeners. Just as McCarthy had anticipated, tracing the boots would be a dead end. Based on the shoe size, the investigators estimated the culprit's height to be between 5 feet 9 inches and 6 feet 2 inches, but this estimate was far from reliable. The killer was far too clever. He could have worn shoes a size too small or too large to disguise his true footprints. The forensic team cast the footprints in plaster and collected soil samples to compare with any shoes they might find belonging to a suspect later. In the muddy ground at the edge of the forest, adjacent to the highway, the crime scene investigators discovered 2 sets of tire tracks, one from a vehicle entering and one exiting, left by 275mm all-terrain tires. They measured the distance between the tire tracks and, by a stroke of luck, found small flakes of chipped paint on the branches of nearby bushes. If they could identify the vehicle's color and model from these paint fragments, it would be their first solid lead on the killer. They sent the data to the FBI's vehicle database in Quantico, the largest and most comprehensive vehicle database in the world. Police departments, crime labs, and various other agencies across the country submitted requests to access this database every second. They had no choice but to get in line. Perhaps a high-profile case involving a serial killer would earn them some priority, but the wait still felt unbearably long. 6.5 hours later, The Pittsburgh Police Department Crime Laboratory received a response from the FBI. The vehicle they were looking for was most likely a dark green Jeep manufactured after 2003, either a Grand Cherokee or a Commander. It was the kind of SUV favored by middle-class people who dreamed of adventure but lacked the courage to actually seek it out. Since a minor redesign in 2003, Chrysler had been using this specific paint formula for all Jeep models, and it was still in use today. A total of 2,620 such Jeeps had been sold in Pittsburgh, 303 of which were dark green. This number didn't even account for vehicles that had been repainted, bought secondhand, or driven into Pittsburgh from other cities. The investigation was still an uphill battle. McCarthy stepped out of his glass-partitioned office. The large bullpen was nearly empty. Jason and Frank were sitting at their desks, drinking coffee and staring at identical case files, their faces etched with exhaustion. It was Saturday afternoon, after all. When they saw McCarthy, they put down their files and stood up. McCarthy gestured for them to come closer. "Gentlemen, I assume you've seen the FBI's vehicle report. We're looking for a post 2003 Jeep. Frank, I need you to go to the Department of Motor Vehicles and pull up the records of those 303 owners. First, rule out all female owners. Then cross off those who are happily married and living with their families. Given the killer's perverted sexual motives, it's highly unlikely he has a stable marriage. He's probably still single or got divorced shortly after marrying. Check if any of them have a history of domestic violence or sexual offenses. Mark those individuals as key suspects. I want a short list on my desk by Monday, if possible." Frank nodded. McCarthy then turned to Jason. "Old friend, I need you to go to the Department of Transportation. Get a copy of all the footage from the surveillance cameras on Highway 92, the one that leads to the suburbs across the stream, from the past 24 hours. Take it to the Crime Lab's Image Processing Center and have them flag every dark green Jeep that passes by, whether it's a Grand Cherokee or a Commander. Note down their passing times and license plate numbers, and pay special attention to any vehicles that traveled back and forth within those 24 hours. Stay on top of them. Make sure our case takes priority, and get me the results as soon as possible. Can you do that?" "No problem," Jason replied firmly. "The killer has been striking once a week. We don't have much time, gentlemen. Let's move." In truth, only McCarthy knew the harsh reality. He had a mere 4 days left before the next body was found. Something had gone wrong. To be precise, I had underestimated those detectives from the robbery homicide unit. They saw through my body-dumping scheme and found some traces I'd left behind. From now on, I'd have to be doubly careful. Those cops weren't smart enough to match wits with me, but they were certainly sharp. This house was safe and quiet, perfect for calming my mind and conducting private business. Now, I needed to stoke the fireplace until the flames blazed higher, warming the room through and through, then pour myself a glass of single malt whiskey. I needed to relax, no need for bed. The sofa would do just fine. I had to review the events of the past few days. I'd worn a full Tyvek protective suit while moving the body, so I was certain I hadn't left behind any fiber evidence. The suit was tough, and I'd taken extra care not to tear it on tree branches during transport. I'd put on 3 pairs of cotton socks, then slipped into a pair of waterproof rubber boots a size too big, so the police's estimate of my height and build would be way off. The socks had been burned to ashes, and the boots tossed into the depths of the Ohio River, 40 miles away. They'd never find them. The more troublesome traces were the tire tracks and the paint scraped off by the bushes. Those were unavoidable. But I'd bought this Toyota Land Cruiser in Cleveland specifically for situations like this. Naturally, I'd used a fake name to purchase the used vehicle. The wheelbase of a Toyota Land Cruiser was only 10 millimeters different from that of a Jeep Grand Cherokee or Commander. After swapping out the tires for the same all-terrain ones, the tracks left by the two vehicles were nearly indistinguishable. All it took was a fresh coat of dark green Jeep paint, and everyone would assume the tracks belonged to a Jeep. The cops and crime scene investigators' familiarity with the best-selling models of the big 3 automakers would limit their imagination. Come on, tire size, wheelbase, paint color, all matching Jeep specs. Who would bother checking if it was actually a Toyota? And avoiding Highway 92 was a masterstroke. Traffic on Highway 92, on the other side of the stream, was less than half that of Highway 139 on this side, making it far too easy to be picked up by surveillance cameras. I'd taken Highway 139 instead. 30 miles west of the body dump site, there was a shallow ford, easy enough to drive the Land Cruiser through. Then I'd climbed a slope, turned around, and reached the opposite bank of the dump site in half an hour. Not a single frame captured by traffic cameras. No problem. The plan was still flawless. They had no evidence that could lead them to me. All right, relax. Now it was time to finalize the plan for hunting my next prey. Think you can stop me? Not a chance. Haven't you heard? Once the devil is let out of the box, he can never be put back in. The investigation wouldn't slow me down. If anything, I should move up the schedule a little, give them a surprise. This next prey was going to be far more interesting than the others. At that thought, he felt a surge of excitement. He unzipped his pants and slid his hand inside. Due to budget cuts, the surveillance cameras on the suburban highways hadn't been included in the last round of hardware upgrades. They still captured low-resolution black and white footage. Jason and his colleagues at the Crime Lab's Image Processing Center spent about 6 hours poring over all the footage, identifying 5 Jeep Grand Cherokees and Commanders, 4 with local plates and 1 with Ohio plates. 4 of them had returned the way they'd come. But to their frustration, the final investigation revealed that none of the 5 vehicles were dark green. Damn it! Wasn't dark green a classic Jeep color? Had it gone out of style now? When Jason called McCarthy to relay the results, the detective immediately realized the killer hadn't taken that highway at all. He'd either taken a detour or pulled some other trick. As for Frank, he was still stuck at the Department of Motor Vehicles. For a rookie like him, sifting through the records of 303 vehicle owners felt like an endless task. There were far too many suspicious individuals to rule out anyone. After an entire day, the list of suspects still numbered over 100. Investigating each one individually would take more than 2 months. And worse, the real killer might not even be on the list. In the evening, after listening to both men's reports, McCarthy hung up the phone wearily. He knew another fruitless day of investigation was slipping through his fingers. He hesitated, wondering if he should grasp at the last lifeline, the final memory from the future related to the case, the name of the third, as yet unharmed, victim. He'd rather not resort to this unless absolutely necessary. Unlike accessing the National Fingerprint Database or CODIS, querying civilian files in the new police database left a record. While the odds were slim, if anyone noticed this file access, he'd have to explain to those nitpickers at Internal Affairs why he'd, coincidentally, looked up the victim's file before the crime even happened. Coincidence wouldn't cut it, and a story about a timequake would only make things worse. At worst, he'd lose his job entirely. Was it worth it to save the life of a woman he'd never met? McCarthy decided to take a chance first. He opened his web browser, typed the keywords Kazuko Hamada and Pittsburgh into the Google search bar. He could remember the spelling of this Japanese name thanks to his college girlfriend from Japan. He'd endured plenty of torture with katakana and hiragana for her sake. As he'd expected, the search results were nothing but irrelevant information. He added another keyword, medical device company. All the clues he could remember. But the screen still showed nothing he was looking for. Clearly, Kazuko Hamada, the next name on the death list, wasn't high enough up the corporate ladder to appear in the management profiles section of the company website. Or perhaps, like many Japanese Americans, she used an English name in daily life. For anyone, this was a difficult step to take. After much hesitation, McCarthy finally acknowledged that between a human life and everything else, he had no other choice. He launched the information query program with the shield icon. He inserted his ID card into the smart card reader connected to the computer. In the login dialog box, he entered his police department, rank, name, and 16-digit identification code in sequence. After a few seconds of connection, his computer linked up to the massive police database, and a welcome message popped up on the screen. Welcome, Detective Ian McCarthy. Please enter the following information about the person you wish to search for. Name, address, social security number/phone number/other keywords. Enter one or more. McCarthy typed the name Kazuko Hamada into the dialog box below, checked the local search box, then pressed the enter key firmly. The system took less than 0.1 seconds to pull up the person he was looking for. In Pittsburgh, There was only one woman named Kazuko Hamada. McCarthy clicked on her name, and every detail about the woman unfolded on his screen in an instant. It was an incredibly detailed information sheet, accessible only to law enforcement personnel with a 12 clearance or higher. It could not be saved, printed, or screenshot. In addition to standard information like profile photo, name, aliases, nationality, ethnicity, physical characteristics, family relations, place of residence, previous addresses, social security number, driver's license, traffic violations, educational and employment history, contact information, and fingerprints. The sheet also listed Kazuko Hamada's work records, financial status, cities visited in the past 3 years, trackable GPS locations, mobile and landline call logs, registered vehicles and weapons, medical history, bank and credit card accounts, political affiliation, religious beliefs, social connections, frequently used email addresses, instant messaging accounts, eBay ID, blog homepage, Facebook profile, Twitter account, online photo album, common usernames, and discussion groups she regularly participated in. Good God. He'd been a cop for 15 years and had no idea the police database contained such terrifyingly detailed records. Did he have a file like this on himself? He tried typing his own social security number. A warning message popped up, stating that accessing information for this number required a 18 clearance or higher, permission he didn't have. McCarthy wasn't entirely sure what a 18 clearance entailed, but judging by the fact that a 12 clearance corresponded to the rank of third-grade detective, a 18 clearance would require authorization at least at the level of district attorney, and possibly even federal authorization. The thought that only a handful of the highest-ranking law enforcement officers could access his own detailed information put McCarthy slightly at ease. What an enormous network of informants it would take to gather such detailed personal information. Yet the detective had never heard of any department within the Pittsburgh FBI field office or the overstretched Pittsburgh Police Department dedicated to collecting personal intelligence. Though it had nothing to do with the case, McCarthy knew he had to get to the bottom of this doubt. The feeling of being watched made it impossible to sleep or eat in peace. He pulled out the police department's internal directory and found the cell phone number of George Shepard, head of the Intelligence and Resources Division. "Hello, who's this?" "Hey, George. It's McCarthy from Robbery Homicide." "Hey, Ian. How's it going?" To be honest, not great. I've got a tough case on my hands, and I've run into some issues during the investigation. Need to pick your brain about something." "Shoot. Let me see if I can help." "Do you know that file query system on the police computers? The one with the shield icon?" "Sure. The Constabulary Inter-Reference Information System, or CIRIS for short. My team installed the software terminals all over the department." "What about it?" "Well, I looked up information on a person involved in the case using this CIRIS. The data is incredibly detailed, which is great. But if I need to verify a piece of information, who should I go to?" "You mean you're questioning the accuracy of a piece of data and want to confirm it with the person who collected it? Is that right?" "Exactly. I don't know which department to contact. I've never heard of any cops in the department handling something like this." "Whoa, buddy, that's impossible. 99% of the data in that database is collected by machines crawling the internet. Ever heard of data mining?" "I've heard the term." "Good. Saves me the trouble of explaining the basics. Anyway, this database wasn't created by the police. There are companies that specialize in this stuff. They crawl the web 24/7, gather all kinds of information, categorize it, and then sell access to the database to anyone who needs it. Our police department just pays for the right to use it. Of course, CIRIS is a bit different. It contains a lot of sensitive information, so the security level is very high. For that, the Pittsburgh city government pays our information provider, Aximo Corporation, $60 million a year. The FBI field office pays extra for their own service. Aximo is the second largest data mining company in the country. They've got 300 people working out of their Pittsburgh office and rent 2 floors of server rooms in the basement of the government building, housing a matrix server system powerful enough to blow your mind. Otherwise, do you think my small team with a few computers and servers could put together a database that impressive? Not a chance. So maybe I can go to Aximo and verify the information in person? Buddy, I'd advise you to forget that idea. You don't understand the complexity of data mining. Only God knows where the information you're looking for originated. You've got no choice but to either believe it or not. Besides, don't mess with Aximo. That place is more heavily guarded than the FBI field office. All right, thanks, George. Sorry to bother you during dinner time. No problem, Ian. McCarthy hung up the phone and stared at the computer screen in front of him for a full 30 seconds, until the information blurred his vision and he finally snapped back to reality. He realized this wasn't the police world described in academy textbooks. At some point, solving cases had shifted from relying on a detective's experience and intuition to relying on high-tech tools, and now they'd turned it into a business. He rubbed his cheeks, pushing those distracting thoughts out of his mind. The record of his search for Kazuko Hamada had already been logged into the server. There was no changing that. He might as well make it count. McCarthy jotted down the information he needed in his memo pad: Kazuko Hamada's work address, office phone number, and cell phone number. When he picked up the phone on his desk again, he realized it was Sunday. The detective sighed and reluctantly put the receiver back in its cradle. Another weekend ruined by the case. He hadn't been home at all that weekend, and his wife and kids hadn't called. They were already used to spending their days off without him. Overwhelmed with guilt, McCarthy dialed home. His wife Laura's voice answered on the other end. McCarthy residence. Who's calling? Honey, it's me. Hey, Ian. Though Laura's voice sounded tired, hearing her call him by his rarely used nickname sent a warm, affectionate feeling through McCarthy's heart. Only family called him Ian. How are the kids? Not giving you too much trouble, I hope. The little ones are fine. I took them to visit your parents. My folks missed their grandchildren like crazy. I drove almost 400 miles total these past 2 days. Wore me out. I'm sorry, honey. You know how it is with this damn case. But I promise it'll be over soon. This case is important. It could mean a promotion for me. As soon as it's done, we'll take a vacation to Hawaii. How does that sound? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Laura's voice rang out again, still tinged with exasperation, but sounding in a better mood. Let's worry about that when the time comes. Are you coming home for dinner or not? Absolutely, of course. McCarthy replied, glancing at the open windows on his computer screen one last time. Laura's words registered in his ears, vibrating his eardrums. If you're coming home, I'll order Chinese food online. The detective froze suddenly, as if struck by lightning. Online ordering. Good God. How had he let such an important clue slip through his fingers? He quickly scrolled through Kazuko Hamada's information sheet and found exactly what he was looking for: a fairly active eBay account. It seemed this beautiful young woman ran a little side business in addition to her day job. Hey, Laura, honey, can you hold off on ordering dinner until I get home? I will be home, but I've got to go now. I'll be back soon. Love you. McCarthy hung up the phone to his house, then dialed Jason's cell phone. Hey, Jason. Hey, Ian. Sorry, still nothing on my end. Any progress on yours? Jason's voice sounded just as exhausted as McCarthy had imagined, but the detective was certain he'd be perking up soon enough. Buddy, remember the second victim? She had a little eBay store selling cosmetics and fishing gear. Yeah, of course I do. I think I know how the killer approached the victims. This way, he could gain their trust quickly. What do you think? I buy something from you on eBay, and it just so happens we're both in Pittsburgh. I suggest meeting in person to hand over the item. For a buyer you met on eBay, even though he's still a stranger, doesn't your guard drop a lot? Holy shit, you're absolutely right. We totally missed that. Check the first victim's records. I bet she had an eBay store too. Cross-reference the buyers from both accounts. We might get lucky. Got it. I'm on it right now. On his way home, McCarthy still felt a flicker of confusion about how the dime killer selected his victims. He already knew two things. The killer chose victims based on their physical appearance, then approached them online to lower their defenses. But how had he initially linked the women he targeted to their eBay accounts? McCarthy himself had registered an eBay account once to sell his daughter's old iMac. It was incredibly easy. All you needed was a credit card. No photos required, not even a tiny headshot like the one on a driver's license. Well, maybe it was Google or online communities. When it came to these trendy internet applications, the detective had to admit he was past his prime. As he drove into his neighborhood, McCarthy decided to stop racking his brain over it for the time being. He'd ask Frank and the other young guys about it tomorrow. There were more important appointments waiting for him, with his family, and with Kazuko Hamada. The conference room at Maybrick Medical Devices was as neat and cold as the products they sold. Floor-to-ceiling tinted windows filtered out the warm parts of the sunlight, and the large stainless steel conference table looked like a mortuary slab. Even with the air conditioning on, McCarthy felt a chill creeping up his spine. If he weren't here to meet Kazuko Hamada, he couldn't have stood being in this place for another minute. He couldn't imagine how those Japanese executives managed to work here 8 hours a day. But when Kazuko Hamada walked into the conference room, the cold, sterile environment suddenly became bearable. McCarthy had known he was going to meet a beautiful woman, but her beauty still took his breath away. The vitality radiating from her body in her business suit was something no corpse or photograph could ever capture. She was about 5 feet 7 inches tall, quite tall for an Asian woman. Perhaps to accommodate her Japanese colleagues, she wasn't wearing high heels, just a pair of flat shoes. Her karate training had given her a sleek, toned physique. Her unbleached black hair was tied back in a ponytail, showcasing her delicate facial features. Her eye sockets weren't as deep as those of white women, making her eyes look even more tender and expressive. She had a small, refined nose, like a cufflink, and when she smiled, 2 dimples appeared on either side of her nostrils. McCarthy stood up, silently thanking his lucky stars that he'd had the foresight to wear his best suit that day. He hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to shake her hand or bow like a Japanese person, but Kazuko Hamada had already extended her right hand. "Hello, you must be the police officer looking for me. If you're Ms. Kazuko Hamada, then yes, I am." He carefully pronounced the Japanese name. "Hehe. Only my father calls me Kazuko. Everyone else calls me Kayla. It's my English name. What should I call you, officer?" McCarthy noticed she didn't have the odd accent common to most Japanese people. She spoke with a trendy New York drawl, the kind of authentic accent you couldn't pick up if you'd only come to the U.S. for college. She must have either been born in America or come here with her parents at a very young age. "Ian McCarthy. You can call me Ian." "Ian, this is my first time dealing with a police officer. I didn't expect to meet one I didn't find completely insufferable." Kayla smiled. "I'll take that as a compliment. And I didn't expect to meet someone as beautiful as you." To McCarthy's complete surprise, this life-or-death conversation was starting off like a flirtation. "All right, let's get down to business, Officer McCarthy. What exactly do you want with me? If it's about my ex-husband David, I'm afraid I don't have much to tell you. I haven't heard from him since we got divorced 3 years ago." "No, I didn't even know you were married and divorced." McCarthy lied. In truth, he'd learned everything he needed to know about the woman in front of him from that confidential series file, but he had to pretend he knew nothing. "This has nothing to do with your ex-husband. It's about you, and it's extremely important." "Oh." Kayla adjusted her posture, suddenly looking tense. "What is it? What's going on?" "I don't want to scare you, Kayla, but your life is in danger." "What?" "You might not have heard. The police are still keeping it under wraps, but 2 women have been killed. They were both beautiful women with black hair, black eyes, and fair skin, just like you. We have reason to believe you might be the killer's next target." "A serial killer?" The Japanese woman looked stunned. But as she stared into McCarthy's serious eyes, the shock on her face slowly turned into an amused smile, and then she burst out laughing. Ian, do you know that's the most ridiculous pickup line I've heard all year? Couldn't you have come up with something more original? Hey, you're still wearing your wedding ring. You don't believe me? You think I made up this whole story just to hit on you? Look, I've never dealt with cops before, but don't take me for a fool. I've seen it in the movies 100 times. You guys always work in pairs. When one of you is acting alone, it always means you're on some kind of rogue mission you don't want anyone to know about. Am I wrong, officer?" She was absolutely right, McCarthy thought. What a smart woman. But of course, he couldn't admit he'd been seen through. He pulled out his badge with the gold emblem and handed it to her, explaining, "This is my badge. See the title on it? It says detective. Detectives at this rank don't need partners. The movies have it all wrong. We work alone all the time. Thanks to government budget cuts, we can't afford to hire enough people. We need to warn 150 potential victims in the area. Even if the officer assigned to warn you today was lower ranked than me, he'd still be coming alone. Working in pairs is a thing of the past. a fond memory from before the economic collapse. Kayla tossed the badge back to him disdainfully. That's part of the trick too, isn't it? Do I have to show you photos of the victims' bodies to make you believe me? Of course you have photos of dead bodies. You guys have photos of every dead body under the sun. But that doesn't prove there's a serial killer on the loose, detective. If I'm not mistaken, you have another job besides this one, don't you? McCarthy didn't want to get bogged down in this argument any longer. He changed the subject. What are you talking about? Selling things online. You have an active eBay account. Even though his eBay theory was still just a hypothesis, McCarthy decided to take the risk. Kayla's expression darkened. It seems you've spent quite a bit of time investigating me, detective. Can I see that badge again? McCarthy handed over his badge. Kazuko Hamada examined every inch of it carefully, then gave it back to him. All right, out with it. What does this have to do with my eBay account? She looked at him with a skeptical expression. We believe the killer approached his victims through eBay transactions, gaining their trust. You need to be careful with your recent eBay deals, especially any buyers who ask to meet in person. If that's the case, then I might as well shut down my business entirely. I sell concert tickets, party passes, discount coupons on eBay. No one's going to pay for FedEx to ship that stuff. They usually drive over to pick it up themselves. Hey, don't worry about me. I can take care of myself. You know how many sexual harassers I take down every month? You guys should give me a medal. I'm doing your job for you. No one around here dares to mess with me. As she spoke, her face lit up with confidence and pride. If McCarthy didn't know what was going to happen, if he hadn't seen her lifeless body on the autopsy table, he would have believed her. But now, he couldn't be sure of anything. So you're not going to suspend your eBay business? Not even for a month. A month? Officer, I don't think you understand how important reputation and fast response times are in this business. To put it bluntly, it's a battlefield. Hesitate for even a second, and your inventory ends up gathering dust. Right now, I'm the second-ranked seller in Pittsburgh. Do you know how many people are gunning for my spot? I can't afford to shut down for a week, let alone a month. It would take me 6 months, maybe even longer, to rebuild my reputation and ranking. I might never get it back. All right, I usually don't recommend this, but given the circumstances, I suggest you buy a gun for self-defense. A gun? All right, I'll think about it, officer. McCarthy knew his advice had fallen on deaf ears once again, but there was nothing more he could do. He could only pray that God was on his side this time. He pulled a business card out of his pocket, scribbled his cell phone number on the back, and handed it to Kazuko Hamada. Kayla, I'm serious. Call me if anything feels off. My phone's on 24/7. Kayla took the card, then pulled out one of her own, wrote down her cell phone number and the address of her eBay store, and handed it to the detective. I hope our next meeting isn't about business, Ian. She gave him a charming smile. McCarthy walked out of the office building housing Maybrick Medical Devices, Kayla Hamada's smile still lingering in his mind. The conversation hadn't been pleasant, but it was certainly unforgettable. The detective walked to his old Mercury sedan parked by the curb, opened the door, and slid into the driver's seat. Just then, his phone rang. It was Jason. The cross-reference of the first 2 victims' eBay accounts had yielded results. They did have one buyer in common. Jason had obtained a search warrant as quickly as possible, but the suspicious account registered on eBay had used a fake name and a stolen credit card number. Bank records showed the real cardholder was an elderly woman living in Texas who hadn't left the state in nearly 20 years. This was exactly what McCarthy had expected. 3 years earlier, when he'd worked with Treasury Secret Service agents on a counterfeiting case, he'd learned that on underground hacker websites, you could buy a complete credit card number, including name, social security number, expiration date, and CVV code, for just $30. The eBay lead was most likely another dead end. Though calling it a dead end might be unfair, it had at least further confirmed McCarthy's theory that the killer approached victims through eBay. The unanswered question from yesterday popped back into his head. The detective hung up the phone, then dialed Frank Kepler. The young man was still stuck at the DMV, cross-referencing the Jeep SUV records for the second time, trying to narrow down the list of suspects. Frank, listen. Put what you're doing on hold for a minute. I need you to help me figure something out. Is there any website that can link an eBay account to a person's real identity, or at least their appearance? Or, if I know someone's appearance or identity, How can I find out if they have an eBay account? Officer, that sounds like something a dating website would do. But as far as I know, no dating website encourages users to share their eBay account information, unless they use the same username for every website they sign up for. Then you might be able to find their activity on different sites through a search engine. A lot of people do that, but it's still really hard. You'd never be able to pick out the person you're looking for from all the others using the same username. Hey, Frank, don't answer so quickly. Think about it carefully, okay? This is important. Listen, I'm on my way to your location. I'll be there in about 20 minutes. I want a well-thought-out answer by then, all right? Yes, sir. 20 minutes later, McCarthy met the young detective, who had dark circles under his eyes, in a small conference room at the DMV. Despite his haggard appearance, Frank didn't seem too demoralized. Officer, I think I know the website you're looking for. Have you heard of Facebook? My daughter mentioned it. She uses it to keep in touch with her classmates. It's a new generation of social networking sites. A lot of people sign up using their real identities because Facebook encourages users to share every thought, every activity with their friends. Not just personal information, photos, and blogs. If you want, you can move your entire life online. Including eBay transactions? Yes, Facebook has an eBay app. Regular users can easily set up a link on their Facebook profile that syncs with their eBay account. And you can see their name, photo, all that stuff? Yes, provided they accept your friend request and add you. If they don't know you, why would they accept your request? Frank smiled. Officer, you might not understand how online friendships work. You just make up some random reason, like, I think you're really cute, or your name is so unique. You must be a really interesting person, or even just, I want to get to know you. Add me. 90% of people will accept your request. After all, that's what the site is for, meeting new people, right? If you decide you don't like them later, you just delete them from your friend list. McCarthy's eyes lit up. Frank, can you borrow a laptop? I need you to show me how this Facebook thing works, right now. Frank stared at the detective's serious expression, suddenly looking uneasy. Officer, do you think the serial killer is using Facebook to select and approach his victims? Wouldn't that be convenient? Holy cow, the young detective muttered under his breath, pulling out his iPhone. It's terrifyingly convenient. You don't even need a computer. I can access Facebook and get all that information right from my iPhone. Stella Safarino and Diana Knightley. Let's see if they have Facebook accounts. Frank typed the two victims' names into the site's search bar and got results almost instantly. There aren't many people named Stella Safarino. I added Pittsburgh as a filter, only one result. From the profile picture, I can confirm it's the first victim, though she still had black hair back then. Diana Knightley. Wait, there are way too many people with that name. 20-something in Pittsburgh alone. There's Diana L. Knightley, Diana F. Knightley. Look, this one looks a bit like her, but I can't be sure. Some of them don't have profile pictures. Others use Facebook's cartoon avatars. One last question, Frank. Besides names, does Facebook support searches by physical characteristics, like hair color or eye color? No, I'm afraid not. Unlike dating websites that focus on offline meetings, Facebook wants all user interactions to happen on the site itself. The information wasn't enough to draw a conclusion yet, but it was enough to keep the detective's investigation going. Thank you very much, Frank. This information is extremely helpful. I think you can stop going through those damn Jeep owner records now. Go home, take a shower, and get some rest. We're getting close to catching that bastard. The young detective let out a huge sigh of relief. Thank you, sir. Honestly, this has been the worst weekend I've had since moving to Pittsburgh. McCarthy grabbed a quick lunch at the Dunkin' Donuts across from the DMV, 2 glazed donuts and a cup of coffee, then drove back to his office. The first thing he did when he walked in was fire up his computer. The Windows startup process felt as slow as human evolution. While he waited, he made himself a cup of coffee. As he passed his administrative assistant Annie's desk, she reminded him, half ingratiatingly, half earnestly, that she could make coffee for him anytime. McCarthy suddenly realized he'd been sitting in that glass-walled office for nearly 6 months, yet he still hadn't gotten used to enjoying the perks that came with being a detective, aside from the private office and the slightly higher number on his paycheck. The past 6 months had only brought him increased hardship. Sometimes he even found himself wondering if he'd made the right decision after all. Maybe the freewheeling life of a regular cop had suited him better. When he returned to his desk, the computer had finished booting up. He opened Facebook's homepage in his web browser and created an account for himself, following the prompts step by step. It was surprisingly easy. Less than 5 minutes later, he had his own profile. He typed Kazuko Hamada into the friend search bar and quickly found the woman he was looking for. Her profile picture showed her smiling brightly. McCarthy clicked the Add Friend link. A dialog box popped up asking for a reason for the request. He typed his name, then thought for a moment and added the prefix detective in front of it. But before clicking confirm, he changed his mind. The detective pressed the delete key, leaving the reason blank, then hit enter. The confirmation reply from Kazuko Hamada came astonishingly fast, almost instantly after McCarthy sent the request. He accessed her profile and effortlessly found her name, photos, and eBay account. If he were the killer, he'd already have all the information he needed. The rest was just a matter of technique. The detective realized with frustration that his warning that morning had been completely useless. That arrogant woman had clicked confirm without even looking at the sender's name. Don't be fooled by her Eastern appearance, he told himself. She was just like any other young woman with a New York accent, always ready for a romantic fling. She'd clearly seen his wedding ring and flirted with him anyway. A woman like that deserves to end up as the dime killer's victim, McCarthy thought, then was horrified by the sudden, unbidden thought. No, he told himself. No matter how promiscuous she was, she didn't deserve such a fate. And his job as a police officer was to do everything in his power to prevent the tragedy from happening. The detective pulled out his cell phone and searched for the number of someone he hadn't contacted in a long time. Before pressing the green call button, he hesitated for a long while. It was a difficult decision, but time was running out. Right now, it seemed like there was no one else who could help him. The lights in the Maybrick office were always the last to go out in the entire building. Though it was thousands of miles away from Japan, the Japanese corporate habit of working overtime had been preserved to a T. The company's official closing time was 6 o'clock, but Kazuko Hamada usually didn't leave the office until around 7. No one dared to leave before her. As department director, she couldn't head home before her subordinates. If she did, they'd all come to her office one by one to report on work, a blatant form of coercion she was powerless to resist. Even if she finished all her work by 4 o'clock, she'd still have to kill 3 hours with nothing to do. Kazuko Hamada was currently chatting with 7 people at once on MSN. Everyone thought she was a girl from rural Japan who'd come to make it big in America's big cities, first New York, then Pittsburgh, enduring countless hardships along the way. But the truth was, Maybrick Medical Devices was a wholly owned subsidiary of Hamada Corporation in the U.S. Nearly 2/3 of the Hamada family worked for the company, and the current president was Kazuko's uncle. If it weren't for family ties, Kazuko Hamada would never have put up with working at such a tedious company. She'd come to the U.S. with her parents when she was 3 years old. Her father, the second in command of the family business, had been sent to America to expand the Hamada family's territory. She'd received a purely American education. But when she was 16, she'd learned her fate had already been decided for her. Attend a prestigious university, get the best education possible, then return to Japan before she turned 30 to marry a man she'd never met. A man who'd been chosen for her the day she was born, and settle down as a housewife supporting her husband's career. That's when she'd started rebelling. She'd seduced every man she found attractive and slept with them. She'd gotten an abortion, run away from home, and even married a guy named David she'd known for only 3 days in Las Vegas. But her father, Tetsuo Hamada, had always managed to find her and clean up the mess using the family's influence. Everything was wrapped up tightly, sealed away from prying eyes. The fool in Japan waiting for his bride would never hear a word of it. Her father had sabotaged every job she'd ever had, forcing her to work at the family company instead. He'd used the entire staff to keep tabs on her. When she'd realized there was no escaping her fate, Kazuko Hamada had decided to stop fighting against her powerful family. She'd resolved to make every day in America as comfortable as possible. As long as she didn't run away from home again, her father had gradually relaxed his control over her. She'd rented her own apartment near the company. She'd taken up karate. She'd made friends online, so her days back in Japan wouldn't be too boring. She'd done the bare minimum at her job as marketing director, but built a thriving side business on eBay. She still dated all kinds of men, but as her 30th birthday loomed, these good times were coming to an end. A serial killer? If he could kill me, maybe it would be a better ending for me, Kazuko Hamada thought with a touch of melancholy, even though she didn't believe a word of that nonsense. When the clock struck 7, she said goodbye to her online friends, shut down her computer, and started packing up to leave the office. Her apartment was just 4 blocks away. Though she kept a Porsche Carrera and an Infiniti sports car parked in the building's garage year-round, she insisted on walking to and from work every day, a 15-minute stroll. At this time on a Monday, there weren't many pedestrians on the street. The road home felt unusually eerie today. After walking a block, Kazuko Hamada suddenly stopped and turned around sharply. Nothing. No hooded figure following her. Only a few passers-by hurrying along like her, a young man talking on his cell phone as he walked past her, and a chubby guy walking out of a fast food restaurant with a paper bag, heading for his car. Damn it, you stupid cop. You scared me. Kazuko Hamada cursed under her breath, turning back around and shoving her hands into the pockets of her trench coat as she continued walking. A serial killer? What nonsense. Just her imagination playing tricks on her. She was only 1 block away from home now, and the sidewalk was getting emptier. As she walked, she tried to reassure herself. The killer was supposed to approach his victims through eBay transactions, wasn't he? He wouldn't attack her in a place like this. Hey, what's wrong with you? Haven't you forgotten you're a karate brown belt? Haven't you made every man who dared to lay a hand on you regret it? What could some imaginary serial killer do to you? But even so, the image of the brutal rapist murderer lingered in her mind, impossible to shake off. Her apartment building was in sight. She could already see its windows. Normally, she'd take a shortcut through this narrow alley, which saved her about 5 minutes. But today, Kazuko Hamada paused in front of the pitch-black alleyway. It's just a slightly dark alley, she told herself. At the alley entrance, she shifted her weight to one side and executed a side kick in her mind's eye. The imaginary serial killer in her head shattered like a watermelon under her foot. The thought gave her an instant burst of courage. She decided to take the alley. The alley was only about 40 yards long. Kazuko Hamada quickened her pace, reaching the end in half a minute. There was a trash can there. She had to sidestep to get around it. Just as she was about to breathe a sigh of relief, a figure suddenly stepped out of the alley entrance. It was a man of average height, backlit so she couldn't see his face. She couldn't even tell his skin color. In his left hand, he carried a black plastic bag. She'd read about this in novels. It was a rapist's kit. In his right hand, he held something. A gun? He's finally here. Seeing the man blocking her path, Kazuko Hamada felt a strange sense of relief instead of fear. She smoothly shifted her sidestepping posture into a back stance, a devastating offensive position in karate when you have a wall at your back, then unleashed a perfect side kick in the blink of an eye, striking him square in the face. Kazuko Hamada was certain he hadn't even had time to tell if she'd kicked with her left foot or her right before taking the brutal blow. The man's head slammed into the alley wall. Then he crumpled to the ground like a sack of potatoes. The bottle in his right hand shattered on the pavement with a sharp clink, and the garbage in his left hand spilled all over the ground. By the time Kazuko realized she'd knocked out nothing more than an unlucky drunk taking out the trash, a powerful hand had already twisted her left arm behind her back. Another hand, clutching a K-bar knife, wrapped around her neck, pressing the blade against her left cheek. A cold, menacing voice sounded behind her. Don't move, bitch. One wrong move, and I'll slash that pretty face of yours. Fuck, you're one dangerous cunt. Shouldn't have underestimated you. Kazuko Hamada's mind went completely blank. She let the man drag her back into the pitch-black alley, pinning her arms behind her back and pressing her body hard against the wall. The man's knife slid from her cheek to her neck. She felt a sharp sting, and for a split second, she thought she was done for. But the sharp K-bar blade only nicked her neck lightly before moving onto her back. When he started tying her hands with something, Kazuko sucked in a sharp breath. No, she couldn't let him tie her hands. If he freed up both his hands, it would be all over for her. Her sensei had taught her that in a situation like this, she should stomp hard on her attacker's toes. But the alley was so dark, it was nearly impossible to aim. Driven by fear, Kazuko gathered all her strength in her waist and rammed her hips backward. The pressure behind her eased for a split second, giving her just enough time to execute a move she'd practiced countless times. She planted her left foot on the wall, using it to launch herself into the air. She spun around, and the instep of her right foot struck the man behind her with the full force of her rotation, a clean, precise sparrowhawk somersault kick. But due to the difference in their heights, the kick that should have hit his carotid artery only struck him in the right chest. Still, the blow was enough to disable the killer. The tall man let out a pained groan, clutching his chest as he fled the alley in a hurry. Kazuko Hamada didn't chase after him. She leaned against the wall, struggling to stay upright, watching as the killer ran out of the narrow alley and disappeared into the night. Only then did she allow herself to breathe a sigh of relief, doubling over and gasping for air, her hands on her knees. Someone had already spotted the unconscious drunk at the alley entrance and called the police. The wail of sirens echoed throughout the neighborhood. By the time patrol officers shone their large flashlights into the alley, a shaken Kazuko Hamada stumbled out of the darkness. "We got a call about a disturbance, ma'am. What happened here?" The two officers rested their hands on their gun belts, asking nervously. Attempted rape. Someone tried to rape me." "Ma'am, are you okay? Do you need us to take you to the hospital?" "No, I'm fine, officer." Kazuko Hamada pointed to the unconscious man on the ground. "He was just taking out the trash. The rapist attacked him and then ran away. You should take him to the hospital instead." The two officers relaxed their guard. One of them picked up his radio to call for an ambulance, while the other started questioning Kazuko. "Ma'am, are you sure you're all right? Can you answer a few questions for us now?" "Yes, I'm fine. What do you need to know? Did you get a good look at the suspect's face?" "No, I didn't. The alley was too dark. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't even tell what color his skin was. All I know is he was really tall, about 6 feet 3 or 4 inches, and very strong. Look at my wrists." Kazuko Hamada showed the officers the bruises on her wrists. They nodded, clearly believing her story. A few minutes later, the ambulance arrived and took the unlucky drunk away. The crowd of onlookers dispersed. The two officers took a brief statement, then asked one last question. "Ma'am, would you be willing to come back to the station with us to give a more detailed statement? It might help us catch the man who attacked you sooner." "No, I think I'll pass. I've told you everything I know. Right now, I just want to go home, take a hot shower, and get some sleep." The two officers seemed to have expected this answer. They didn't press Kazuko further, wished her a good night, and drove off. Kazuko Hamada dragged her exhausted, traumatized body back to her apartment. She locked the door with 3 deadbolts, closed all the windows, and turned on every light in the place before collapsing onto the sofa in complete exhaustion. She knew that no matter how tightly she locked the doors and windows, she wouldn't feel safe for a single moment that night. For the next 10 hours, fear and nightmares would be her only companions. This was a disaster. A complete and utter disaster. They sent me a warning letter. They canceled one of my accounts for suspected fraud, and that bot bank account is no longer usable. That means the police have discovered my little secret on eBay. Disguising myself as an eBay buyer is no longer an option. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that some horny idiot tried to attack prey number 3. God damn it. I knew trouble was brewing when I saw that guy follow her into the alley, but there was nothing I could do about it. I had to stand by and watch that brain-dead pervert ruin my plan. No, I couldn't have rushed in to stop him and taken his place. Thank God I didn't. Prey number 3 was far more formidable than I'd anticipated. And of course, I couldn't call the police. I couldn't do anything that might lead them back to me before the plan was fully executed. Now, prey number 3 would definitely be on high alert. None of my usual methods for approaching victims would work anymore. She might even ask for police protection. Nothing could be worse than this. Calm down. Calm the fuck down. 3 years ago in Philadelphia, the situation was far more difficult and dangerous, and you still found a way out. You handled it perfectly. Calm down and think carefully. You can turn this around. McCarthy picked up the phone. A hoarse roar, punctuated by coughs, came from the other end of the line. "You bastard. Cough. You almost got me killed. Why the hell didn't you tell me she knew martial arts? Cough. You've got me fucked up good. I told you she was a bit dangerous." "A bit dangerous? You call that a bit dangerous? She's the female version of Bruce Lee, for Christ's sake." Cough. My collarbone is cracked, along with my first and second ribs. If I'd been an inch shorter, cough, just 1 inch. If that kick had hit my neck instead, buddy, you'd be visiting me in the morgue right now. How the hell was I supposed to know she was that good? Her file only said she had a karate brown belt. I just wanted you to scare her a little, not go all out. Cut the crap, cough. How do you scare someone like that without going all out? I'm always the one doing the dirty work, and you're always the one getting the credit. Tell me, how many times have I bailed you out since you got transferred to robbery homicide? Cough. Is this how you treat the guy who's had your back since we were kids? All right, I'm sorry. My bad. Are you sure no one saw you? Relax, detective. This won't lead back to you. When have I ever messed up a job? My chest hurts like hell every time I move. The doctor said I'll be bedridden for at least 2 weeks. Listen, I can't make it tonight. Giselle will take my place. She's the girl you met at my place last time. Give her the money. Hey, and you owe me an extra $500 for this. Unlike you, I don't have health insurance. Got it. Listen, Z. I checked the police reports. The woman didn't file an official complaint, so you can rest easy in bed. No need to worry about cops kicking down your door in the middle of the night. See you later, buddy. Later, you sneaky bastard. After ending the call, McCarthy felt half his worries fade away. His plan to have someone pretend to attack Kazuko Hamada seemed to have gone off without a hitch, for now. But Kazuko hadn't called the police for protection, as he'd expected. She hadn't filed an official report, which meant McCarthy had no reason to link this attack to the serial murders, and thus no excuse to assign officers to guard her. But resorting to this trick so late in the game might already be too little, too late. The detective called Jason, who was still chasing the stolen bank account lead and had roped Frank into helping him. Right now, they were busy coordinating with the guys over at Intelligence and Resources, hoping to dig up some clues from that angle. Trying to trace anonymous online transactions was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Even if they found something, it would probably be too late. Less than a day remained until the killer struck again. But sitting around the office wouldn't get him anywhere either. McCarthy idly moved the mouse, scrolling through Facebook. The only thing he could do now was keep an eye on the potential victim, Kazuko Hamada. But thinking about what had happened to Z, McCarthy quickly abandoned that idea. He felt a twinge of guilt about Z, but visiting a rape suspect before the case was closed would be the stupidest thing he could do. Z's real name was Nick Meyer. He'd been a street-fighting prodigy since childhood. McCarthy remembered back when they were kids, when it came to surviving in that run-down, dangerous neighborhood. He, a white Irish kid, couldn't hold a candle to the black and Mexican boys. He'd gotten his ass kicked countless times as a teenager. But thanks to Z's protection, he'd made it through that hellish period. Z was strong, and he was the only white kid in the neighborhood who was willing to fight dirty. He'd been the de facto protector of all the local white boys. But things had changed after that. McCarthy had worked his way through college with hard work and a bit of luck, while Z had dropped out of high school after getting caught stealing cars and selling marijuana. Their paths had diverged completely, until 5 years ago, when they'd crossed paths again during a joint vice and narcotics raid. Back then, Z had been working as an enforcer at a local strip club, moonlighting as a pimp and occasionally running cocaine and meth. When McCarthy had arrested him, Z had been in the middle of dumping a few ounces of cocaine down a storm drain. Just like in the movies, they'd pointed guns at each other, until they'd recognized each other's faces behind the barrels. In the end, it was Z who'd recognized McCarthy first. At the time, Ian had been working vice and had hesitated to arrest his childhood friend. Z had taken advantage of that hesitation, holstering his gun and vanishing into the dark alley. Since then, Z had become McCarthy's most important confidential informant. And McCarthy had climbed the ranks steadily, thanks to all the exclusive tips Z had provided, making detective second grade in less than 2 years and earning a spot in the Pittsburgh Police Department's most prestigious unit, robbery homicide. 9 out of 10 police chiefs in Pittsburgh had come up through robbery homicide. But life in the unit had been cutthroat. It wasn't until a year ago, when he'd cracked the case of the Professor Kilgore Trout, that McCarthy had finally gotten his shot at promotion. Thinking about that, McCarthy's mood lifted. If he could solve this case, the rank of detective captain would be within his grasp. Hell, maybe even deputy chief, chief of police, maybe even a position with the FBI. He'd never felt so close to success before. The president's office of Maybrick Medical Devices Company Limited was located on the top floor of the building, a sprawling space that occupied nearly half a floor. McCarthy had never looked down on the city he'd lived in for almost 40 years from a height of 90 feet above the ground. Through the huge floor-to-ceiling windows, half of Pittsburgh came into full view. Gazing at the breathtaking scenery, he thought enviously that his office on the third floor of the police headquarters, touted as the prime spot in the Robbery Homicide Division's bullpen, was barely better than a bathroom, minus the toilet. Half an hour earlier, McCarthy had nearly jumped out of his skin when he heard Kazuko Hamada's voice on the phone. He'd waited all day Tuesday for that call, only to waste the entire day sitting idly in his office. On Wednesday morning, the day of the incident, in his final moments of despair, the call came, yanking him back from the abyss. But instead of going to the police station for protection, Kazuko had asked him to meet her at her company in half an hour. It wasn't the ideal development, but it was more than enough to lift his spirits. "Brandy or plum wine?" she asked. "Plum wine, please. Is this your office?" "Don't play dumb, detective. You know this office belongs to my father, don't you? I just happen to have a key." McCarthy took the glass awkwardly and sipped it. The long-forgotten sweet and sour taste flooded his mouth. He hadn't had plum wine since he graduated from college. Time was pressing, but McCarthy hesitated whether to cut straight to the chase. Maybe it was better to let her speak first. She'd obviously called him here about that matter. What else could it be? Kazuko drained half her glass in one gulp, then refilled it. Leaning lazily against the edge of the massive desk, she brushed her hair aside. McCarthy noticed she'd let her long hair down today, adding an extra touch of charm to her already striking looks. But when she tucked the stray strands back, covering the right side of her neck, McCarthy's eyes fell on the faint scar there. The sharp-witted Japanese woman caught his gaze instantly, and a flicker of panic crossed her face. She forced a calm tone and said, "I was attacked the night before last. I suppose you already know." "I do. I read the report on the attempted rape. Why didn't you call the police? We could have provided you with protection. I looked you up online, Detective McCarthy." She sidestepped the question smoothly. Of course, she couldn't call the police. If word of this got back to her father, who was currently at a company headquarters meeting in Japan, her life in America would be over in an instant. "You're quite famous, you know. You caught that serial killer a year ago." McCarthy didn't respond, waiting for her to continue. "Tell me, detective, how much do you know about serial killers?" "Just enough. Most serial killers are white males. Over 90% of them kill to satisfy twisted sexual urges. Regular sex no longer does it for them. Some target specific types of victims, but many others choose their prey at random. They leave a unique signature at the crime scene. A serial killer's modus operandi might change as he commits more murders, but his signature never does, because it's tied to that specific thrill, the core of his killing. What's the signature of the man you warned me about?" "That's top case secret. I can't tell you." "Fine. You said he'd pose as an eBay buyer to get close to me. Why didn't he this time? What happened?" McCarthy paused for a moment, then said, "Maybe eBay shut down his scammer account. He had no choice but to take a more direct approach." "Are you absolutely sure you didn't see anything? Can you try to remember again, Kayla? I know it's hard, but it's crucial, any detail at all." "He was huge, 6'2" or 6'3", built like a bear. But he underestimated me. He didn't even use his full strength, which is why I was able to kick him. That kick must have hurt like hell. I once broke 5 wooden planks with a single kick, but with how strong he was, I doubt my hurried strike did any real damage." "Oh, and his voice, very raspy. Probably faked it, though? It's easy to sound like a zombie." Kazuko cleared her throat and let out a couple of hoarse croaks. "Something like that. From the sound of it, he wasn't wearing a mask. He didn't care if I saw his face, though the alley was too dark to make out anything. I think he never intended to leave me alive." Her voice trailed off, and she clapped a hand over her mouth, unable to go on. She could no longer hide her terror. That useless bastard swore it would be foolproof. McCarthy grumbled to himself, pretending to jot notes in his notepad. "You were very brave, Kayla. This is more than enough. The information you've given me is extremely helpful." Kazuko brushed a tear from the corner of her eye and said, "Detective, tell me the truth. Do serial killers fixate on one target?" Will he come after me again, or will he give up and move on to someone else? McCarthy shook his head. I'm sorry, but no. Unless he's caught, serial killers don't let go of their prey. They can't stand the thought of failure. He'll keep watching you, waiting for another chance to strike, until we catch him. Listen, Kayla, I can assign you protection. If you agree, I can get 2 plainclothes officers to guard you 24 hours a day until we take this bastard down. No, absolutely not. Kazuko snapped suddenly, her voice sharp with intensity. No one in the company can know about this, not a single word. If even a hint of this reaches my father, the owner of this office, I'll be shipped back to Japan faster than you can blink to spend the rest of my life in a place worse than hell. I'd rather be killed by that serial killer first. Ian, do you think this is why I met you here instead of going to the police? Give me another option. She was hiding something that made her refuse police protection at all costs. McCarthy knew he'd never be able to convince this stubborn woman in the next half hour. Time was running out, forcing him to make a final decision. All right, Kayla, if you're dead set on this, I have something for you. Something you'll need in an emergency. You have to promise me you'll use them, because there's no other choice left. Fine, I promise. Bring out your little lifesavers. McCarthy held up his hands. They're at my house. I came straight from the station and didn't bring them with me. I live in the northwest part of the city, about 15 miles from here. Well, what are we waiting for? Kazuko said. Let's go to your place, my car. 15 minutes later, a bright yellow Porsche pulled into McCarthy's driveway. He told Kazuko to wait in the car, then walked up the steps, rang the doorbell, and called out loudly, Laura, honey, it's me. But there was no answer. He pulled out his garage remote, pressed the button, and the garage was empty. The family's other car, a Mazda, was gone. Laura must have gone to the supermarket to prepare for their anniversary candlelit dinner. McCarthy vividly remembered how, in the previous timeline, a dead body had ruined that very same dinner. Now, the intended victim was sitting in his driveway, waiting for him to give her a second chance. McCarthy unlocked the front door. Everything inside was neat and tidy. The wall clock in the hallway showed 5 minutes to 11. On the calendar below it, February 4th was marked with a bright red heart. He reached out and touched the mark. But now wasn't the time for sentimentality. He pushed aside his guilt toward his wife and hurried to the master bedroom. The 2 lifesavers were hidden in a safe behind the nightstand. 5 minutes later, McCarthy left the house and climbed back into the Porsche. In his left hand, he held a thick gray vest. In his right, a handgun and an ankle holster. A little personal collection of mine, he said. This is a bulletproof vest made of a Kevlar and Spectra fiber blend, the lightest one on the market right now. It can stop a .44 Magnum round. That guy got burned last time. If he comes after you again, he'll probably be packing heat. I want you to wear this under your sweater. The ballistic fibers are flexible, and with your build, it shouldn't be too uncomfortable. And this, he pulled the compact, boxy pistol from the holster, is a Glock 26 subcompact semi-automatic. It's loaded with 10 rounds. No external safety, just squeeze the trigger and it fires. Don't worry, the internal safety is foolproof. Recoil is minimal, perfect for emergencies and people with no shooting experience. The holster straps to your ankle, but if you're wearing a skirt, you can attach it to your thigh instead. Kazuko took the vest and the gun. The vest was surprisingly heavy, weighing almost a kilogram, and the tiny pistol was heavier than she'd expected. But for someone with her strength, neither was too much of a burden. She tossed the vest onto the back seat and slipped the gun into her handbag, then started the engine. You want me to kill him? She asked, her voice steady now, no trace of panic left. McCarthy looked at her, his tone serious. I just want you to come back alive. After parting ways with Kazuko in Maybrick's underground parking garage, McCarthy retrieved his car and headed back to the police station. 2 minutes earlier, he'd turned down the Japanese woman's invitation to lunch. Honestly, on this critical day, he should have stayed close to the potential victim as long as possible. But today was his 15th wedding anniversary with Laura. In the previous timeline, he'd already let his wife down. Now he had a chance to make it right. He'd done everything he could for this Japanese woman, yet he'd barely thought about making amends to his wife and children. The realization left him with no excuses, even though no one was asking for any. Maybe he should call Laura, find out where she was, and help her prepare a nice dinner. But if Kazuko still couldn't escape her fate, if he ended up disappointing his wife again tonight, calling now would only make things worse. After grabbing a quick lunch of Kung Pao chicken with rice at a Chinese restaurant near the station, McCarthy returned to his pitiful glass cubicle. As he passed his administrative secretary Miss Annie's desk, she told him the chief had called once, asking him to return the call as soon as he got back. His wife Laura had also called, inquiring about the case progress and whether he had any urgent assignments today. Annie had brushed her off, saying nothing. Though the detective was certain no one else knew about his 2 meetings with Kazuko, Annie's odd, slightly mocking expression when mentioning Laura's call made him feel a twinge of embarrassment. McCarthy closed the frosted glass door of his cubicle, and the noise from the bullpen faded instantly. On his desk sat a cup of cold coffee. Annie had made it for him that morning, but he'd never gotten around to drinking it. He picked up the cup and took a big gulp, then grabbed the phone and dialed the chief's number. Chief Owen's voice came through, drowned out by the background clatter of sunshine, beaches, yachts, champagne, and the chatter of bikini-clad women. Just from those cheerful sounds, McCarthy could picture the idyllic Florida beach on the other end of the line. For a moment, he thought of his promise to take Laura to Hawaii. "Hey Ian, got a call from Sean this morning. He says the case you're working on is looking a bit rough, so I wanted to hear it from you. How's the investigation going?" "Progress is slower than we anticipated, but everything's on track, Chief. The suspect is smart, but we've got plenty of leads now. I think we'll have him in custody soon." "Good to hear, Ian. Sean wanted me to fly back first thing Thursday, but it sounds like that won't be necessary, huh? I hope you'll have good news for me when I get back next Monday." "You will, Chief. I'll do my best. Listen, watch out for the press, okay? Sean says the media's got wind of this. There have been reporters loitering around the station. Tell your team to keep their mouths shut and not screw this up." "Of course, Chief. No need to worry." "All right then. Don't let me down, Ian. See you at the station next Monday." "Goodbye, Chief." McCarthy hung up the phone, wondering if he'd made the right choice. If Kazuko survived this, he was 80% sure she would. The chief would get to enjoy his much-needed vacation in full and return to the best possible news on his first day back. McCarthy would undoubtedly secure his position and become the front-runner for the next deputy chief promotion. It would be the perfect ending. And even if things didn't go as planned, the chief coming back to the city wouldn't help solve the case. It would only bring an FBI agent with him, turning things back to the way they were before the timequake, the worst-case scenario. But if that was already rock bottom, any change had to be for the better, right? McCarthy sipped his cold coffee and began rereading the case file from the very beginning. To an old-school detective like him, there was no such thing as the perfect murder. Clues were hidden in the margins of the file. He just hadn't been able to connect the dots through all the smoke and mirrors. But he soon found it impossible to focus. Kazuko Hamada, Laura, Big Z, Kilgore Trout, the wedding anniversary. All these thoughts swirled around in his head, tangling together. Time dragged on endlessly. McCarthy tried to push these distractions aside and re-examine the case from the start, but he couldn't concentrate. Short of closing his eyes and taking deep breaths, he had no idea how to clear his mind. After all, he'd never faced a situation like this before. The desk clock in the corner ticked slowly toward 4:30 p.m. He forced himself to listen to the entire interrogation recording Jason had made at the restaurant where the first victim, Stella, had worked. The questioning had been sloppy, probably because Frank hadn't gone with him. Jason had used almost no interrogation techniques at all. Experienced detectives often relied on subtle hints and roundabout questions, but Jason had skipped all that. His first or second question was always about alibis. Once he'd confirmed a solid alibi, he'd lost interest in any other potential clues and moved on to the next person. Sure, everyone's alibi had checked out, but this was still an incomplete set of suspect interviews. If time weren't so tight, McCarthy would have had to redo this part of the investigation himself. What the hell had Jason been doing? Just then, his phone rang. Bad timing. McCarthy glanced at the caller ID. It was home. Laura must have everything ready. He answered the phone, and his wife's warm voice came through the line. "Honey, you will be home for dinner tonight, won't you?" McCarthy wanted more than anything to say, "Of course, no problem." But after a moment's hesitation, what came out was, I don't know, honey. The case is really heating up. I just got off the phone with the chief in Florida. He wants me to wrap this up before he gets back next Monday. But today's our 15th wedding anniversary. Did you even forget? No, honey, of course I didn't forget. How could I? But listen, I can't say for sure if I'll make it home for dinner. I'll call you later, and if I can get away, I promise I'll be there. But such excuses didn't work on a woman who'd been married to a cop for 15 years. Laura's tone shifted from disappointment to anger. Ian McCarthy, do you really think your job is more important than this family? Than me? You're all the same, covering for each other. I called your office, and that bitch who answered wouldn't tell me a thing. I called your old partner Jason, and that asshole had his phone turned off. I've been married to you for 15 years. Is this really what I get? Laura, go to hell. The line went dead with a sharp click. Laura hadn't given him a chance to explain. McCarthy stared at his phone, frozen for a full minute. In that split second, the word sorry didn't even cross his mind. His brain was racing, the fog that had shrouded the killer lifting layer by layer. Guided by that crucial clue, everything clicked into place. A terrifying, spine-chilling thought flooded his mind, impossible to ignore. There was no doubt about it. The killer was a cop. It had nothing to do with Facebook. That inefficient search method, with its traceable friend request system, given the killer's demonstrated intelligence, there was no way he'd choose such a risky channel to select his victims. The Siri system, on the other hand, was the perfect hit list. Even now, the detective still remembered how convenient and detailed Siri's was. Sure, it left search records, but Siri's received thousands of queries every day. Even the Department of Internal Affairs rarely paid attention to these voluminous logs, which were mostly dismissed as junk data. And being a cop provided advantages no other job could match. McCarthy finally understood why the killer had been able to gain his victims' trust so quickly. It wasn't just his appearance. Beyond posing as an eBay buyer, what was more reassuring than a police badge? McCarthy dialed Jason Gregg's cell phone number. Just as Laura had said, it was turned off. A sense of dread washed over the detective. He fumbled in the inner pocket of his suit jacket, hanging on the back of his chair, and pulled out the business card Kazuko had given him. He dialed the handwritten cell number, and it went straight to voicemail. He tried twice more, same result. Shit. God damn it. The image of Kazuko Hamada's pale, lifeless body lying on the morgue table flashed before his eyes again. He didn't even bother grabbing his coat. Snatching his car keys from the desk, he sprinted out of the office and down to the parking garage below. Before starting his old Ford Mercury, McCarthy forced himself to calm down and think. Where should he go first? In the previous timeline, the body had been found in the parking garage, but he already knew that was just a dump site, not the actual crime scene. Going there would only mean cleaning up after her. Checking the access logs at Aximo Corporation to see who else had looked up Kazuko's file besides him would identify the culprit. But then he remembered the warning George from the Intelligence and Resources Unit had given him. McCarthy quickly dismissed that idea. It was impossible to access that high-security facility without a search warrant. Waiting for one would be even worse than going to the parking garage. Besides, even without checking Aximo, McCarthy already had his prime suspect in mind. Maybe he could ask George to do a cell phone triangulation. But given how careful the killer had been in the first two murders, Kazuko's phone was probably already disassembled and tossed in some alley trash can. Tracking the killer via his cell phone was out of the question too. A detective familiar with the Siri system would have definitely noticed the GPS traceable flag on the information list. When he was out committing crimes, he'd make sure to leave his regular phone far away. That left only two options: Maybrick Medical Devices headquarters or Kazuko's house. The chances of finding her at either place were slim, but maybe someone there could provide valuable information. Just as McCarthy hesitated, his phone suddenly rang like crazy. He pulled it out, an unknown number. He pressed answer. McCarthy, who is this? A woman's voice, choked with sobs, came through the line. Perfect New York accent. I killed him. What? I killed him, Ian. He attacked me, shot at me. God, it hurts like hell. Why didn't you tell me getting shot while wearing a bulletproof vest would hurt this much? He tried to kill me. But I killed him, with the gun you gave me. Besides the areas protected by the vest, are you hit anywhere else, Kayla? Are you hurt? I don't think so. God, it's so painful. Ah, but I think I'm okay. Both shots he fired hit the vest. What about the killer? Are you sure he's dead? I think so. I shot him 3 times, right in the chest. He's been lying there motionless for 5 minutes. I'm sure he's dead. Where are you? Tell me exactly where you are, Kayla. I don't know the name of this place. There's no cell phone signal here. I'm in a small wooden cabin. Wait, let me think. I think I remember the way here. It's north of the city. Take Highway 9 toward the Great Lakes. Take the first exit to the suburbs, then drive west for about 20 miles. You'll see huge oak forests on both sides of the road. All the leaves are gone. You can see right into the woods from the highway. There's a dirt road leading into the trees. Follow it for 50 feet, and you'll see the cabin. It's not that small. Actually, it's a 2-story vacation home. Hurry, Ian. Despite her tears, Kazuko's description was clear and precise. Okay, I'm on my way. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Kayla, did you call 911? No. God, do you think I'm an idiot? I used your gun to kill that son of a bitch. The first person I thought to call was you. Good. Don't call the police until I get there. Okay, Kayla? I understand. Just hurry the hell up. And for the record, that guy, the serial killer, he was a cop too. He said he worked with you, for Christ's sake. I know. I already figured out who he is. Just wait for me. Kayla, I'm on my way now. Stay there, don't touch anything. Bastard. I should have seen this coming earlier. McCarthy's heart was a mix of excitement and frustration. He should have realized at the moment he'd looked at that file on Ceres. He started the car, turned onto the highway, pressed the gas pedal to the floor, pushing the old Ford Mercury to its absolute limit, speeding northward as fast as it would go. The cabin wasn't easy to find. Kazuko's estimate of the distance had been way off. But relying on her description and his years of experience as a detective, McCarthy located the 2-story wooden house hidden in the woods within 40 minutes. It was built halfway up a small hill, surrounded by a thick layer of fallen leaves. The ground was damp, and through the bare winter trees, he could see a small lake in the distance. Like all remote forest vacation homes, it exuded a peace and tranquility the city could never offer. But thinking about the evil it concealed, McCarthy felt a pang of nausea in his chest. When he saw the dark green Toyota Land Cruiser parked at the cabin door, the detective knew he'd found the right place. Another clever trick, McCarthy thought bitterly. He parked his Mercury next to the Land Cruiser, jumped out, and drew his gun. He'd left his coat and suit jacket in his office at the station, and the cold forest air made him shiver violently. But he first circled the cabin, making sure there was no one else around. Only then did he walk up to the door and call out loudly, "Kayla, are you in there? Can you hear me?" A familiar female voice came from inside. "Yes, I can hear you. Ian, it's me. I'm coming in, don't shoot." McCarthy kicked the door open, raising his gun at the same time to scan the room. Even in this situation, he had to be wary of a trap. Killers often used hostages to lure police into ambushes. The fireplace was roaring, and a wave of warm air hit him as he stepped inside. Within his line of sight, the only person present was Kazuko Hamada, sitting on the arm of the sofa, her hair messy and clothes disheveled. McCarthy slipped inside, closed the door behind him, and took 2 steps forward. That's when he saw the body lying on the floor between the sofa and the coffee table. The coin killer he'd been hunting for 3 weeks. No, 6 weeks. Now he lay face down in a pool of his own blood. His hands were covered in plastic gloves. A length of nylon rope lay beside his left hand, and his right hand clutched a 9mm Beretta. His blonde hair glinted under the lights and the fireplace glow. McCarthy approached slowly, carefully rolling the body over onto its back. Frank Kepler's young, handsome face stared up at him, covered in blood, his features twisted in a rictus of pain. Ian McCarthy stood up, glancing around the room before fixing his gaze on Kazuko Hamada. The Japanese woman stared back at him, still shaken. Through the 2 charred bullet holes in her dark red sweater, he could see the gray bulletproof vest underneath. McCarthy held up a finger, signaling her to stay quiet, then waved her over. She followed him obediently, stepping carefully from the living room to the kitchen, then the bathroom, then the den. After checking the first floor, the 2 of them went up the stairs together, one after the other. McCarthy led Kazuko on a thorough search of the entire house. No accomplices, No hidden children in the closet corners, no frozen bodies in the freezer, no trace of anyone else being there. In the hidden compartment of the den closet, he found what he was looking for: 10 cans of various brands of chlorine bleach, large syringes, 3 Tyvek hazmat suits, 4 pairs of oversized rubber boots, old sneakers, body bags, double-stranded nylon rope, lint rollers for cleaning up traces, a whole box of medical-grade plastic gloves, luminol spray for detecting residual fluid evidence at crime scenes, and a jar of quarters. The compartment was packed neatly with all of it. Kazuko let out a scream, grabbing McCarthy's arm in terror. But the detective breathed a sigh of relief, holstering his gun. All his doubts were gone. This rotten apple, who'd infiltrated the police force, was responsible for all these crimes. As for how this young detective, with a security clearance level of only A9, had managed to gain access to the series system's A10 restricted functions, he'd obviously never get an answer from the killer himself. But he already had the decisive witness testimony and physical evidence he needed. The rest were just trivial details. He patted Kazuko's hand gently and said softly, "It's okay, Kayla. It's over now. You're safe. Tell me what happened." "This guy came to my office this afternoon, around 3 o'clock. He said he was a detective from the Pittsburgh Police Department's Robbery Homicide Division. He showed me his badge and ID, said he was working on a serial rape murder case, and that I was the next target, just like you told me. I told him you'd already come to see me. Then that bastard said he worked with you. He even had a photo of the two of you together. Badge ID photo. I had no reason not to believe him. He said the situation was urgent, that he needed to put me under protective custody, take me to a police safe house for a few days. Why didn't you call me to verify it?" "I was going to, but he told me my cell phone and office line weren't safe, that they were probably bugged. He made me hand over my phone, and I did. He said he'd call you, and that you'd meet us at the safe house later." God, I didn't doubt a single word of his lies. Ian, was he really a cop? McCarthy hesitated for a moment, answering awkwardly. Yes. He was a detective in robbery homicide. Oh my God, does that mean he has other accomplices? The guy who attacked me the night before last wasn't him. He wasn't that strong. I'm sure of it. That attack was probably just a trick to give him an excuse to get close to you, to lower your guard. I'll keep investigating this case. Don't worry, you're safe now. I promise. He squeezed her hand. McCarthy knew there was no more danger. He'd beaten fate. He'd won. The detective looked at Kazuko's tear-streaked face, breaking into a relieved smile, making a promise offhandedly. And the secret promise that had haunted him since the timequake was finally fulfilled. Kazuko gradually calmed down, her voice growing steadier. "When we got here, he attacked me from behind while I wasn't looking, choked me with a rope. I stomped hard on his toes, then hit him in the ribs with my elbow. It's the most effective move when someone's choking you from behind. Once I broke free, he wasn't a match for me. So he pulled a gun and shot at me. God, it hurt, but thank God for this bulletproof vest you gave me. Otherwise, I'd be dead right now." The Japanese woman pulled her hand out of the detective's grasp. Her palm, once cold with sweat, was now warm and dry. McCarthy noticed she was still holding the Glock 26 in her other hand. I pulled out the gun and fired back. He was stunned. That bastard never expected me to be wearing a bulletproof vest and carrying a gun. Look, I hid it here. Kazuko lifted her skirt, revealing the holster strapped to her inner thigh. You were incredibly brave, Kayla. The Japanese woman smiled. I guess I don't need this anymore. She unbuckled the holster from her thigh and handed both it and the gun back to McCarthy. The detective was about to say, "You can keep it," but then he remembered. The Glock 26 was crucial evidence in the killer's death, and Kazuko didn't have a gun permit. He took the gun and holster, chuckling to himself at his momentary, foolish urge to curry favor with her. "All right, it's all over now, Kayla. Let's get out of here." He reached out to take her hand, but felt a clear resistance. "What's wrong, Kayla? Did something happen?" McCarthy looked at the woman in surprise, who'd just cheated death. She leaned against the arm of the sofa, her emotions calm now, but still hesitant to leave. "Is there something else you're not telling me, Kayla?" the detective asked gently. Kazuko looked at him, saying slowly, "I want to sit for a while longer, Detective McCarthy. Can you stay with me?" McCarthy sat down on the arm of the other sofa, resting his elbows on his knees, staring silently at Kazuko. She didn't look at him, instead glancing around the room, running her fingers through her hair. He didn't rush her. In a situation like this, impatience would only make things worse. He had to let the Japanese woman speak first. All he could do was wait. Finally, the Japanese woman turned her gaze to his face. But McCarthy saw no trace of relief or joy at having escaped death in her eyes. Walking out of this cabin, she began, will mean the end of my life in America. McCarthy didn't reply. Kazuko went on, speaking to herself as much as to him. You'll call your colleagues, won't you? This case is too big to cover up. My father will find out soon enough, and he'll send me back to Japan immediately. She paused, taking a deep breath. Detective McCarthy, I know you've looked into me, that you know a lot about me. But there's so much more you don't know. The truth is, I have a fiancé in Japan, a man I've never even met. My family arranged it for me. Can you believe that? In this day and age, something like that still happens. Kazuko began to tell him her family's story, a story not even Ceres could have uncovered. McCarthy listened quietly, a mix of emotions surging inside him. This beautiful, independent, strong woman had just survived a nightmare, only to be swallowed up by her life back home. And there was nothing he could do to help her. For a moment, he even felt a twinge of jealousy toward that fiancé halfway across the world. Kazuko reached out her hand. McCarthy took it in both of his. Her fingers were long, with elegant knuckles. He could feel a distinct pull from her palm, drawing him closer. Hold me, detective. Let's stay like this for a little while longer. Kazuko placed one of his hands on her shoulder. McCarthy slipped his arm around the back of her neck naturally, stroking her back gently. Detective, you'll probably be the last man I ever hold in America. Kazuko whispered in his ear. Oh, and one more thing to return to you. The Japanese woman took his other hand, guiding it under the hem of her sweater, pressing it against the Velcro fastener of the bulletproof vest under her arm. Take it off, she said. The detective's hand froze, unsure what to do. Under his embarrassed gaze, Kazuko hugged him tightly. Through the hard, bulletproof vest, he could feel the soft curve of her breasts against his chest. Take it off, she pleaded again. McCarthy pulled his other hand free, slipping it under her sweater too, unfastening the Velcro on both sides of the vest. He lifted the vest, along with her sweater, up over her head. Kazuko raised her arms obediently, letting him pull them off. The discarded sweater and vest were tossed aside. Their lips met in a kiss, tongues tangling together. Soon, her thermal underwear and wool skirt joined the pile on the floor. Now she wore nothing but a black lace bra and panties. 2 dark bruises were already forming on her abdomen where the bullets had hit, but they only added to her allure. Kayla. Kazuko didn't let him finish, kissing him again, a long, deep kiss that silenced any further protests. They lost track of time. Their lips, locked together as if fused, finally parted. No, not here. Why not? Don't worry. That son of a bitch planned to kill me here. He'd never let anyone come near. I'm not worried about that. Ever made love next to a dead body? Kazuko asked, half jokingly, as she unbuckled McCarthy's belt. Yeah, what was there to worry about? I did it. I just pulled this woman back from the brink of death. I changed both our fates. There was no better outcome than this. No celebration was too much. The wedding anniversary? There was a wedding anniversary every year. But something like this would never happen again. Let this year's anniversary go to hell. Kazuko's lips crashed against his again, silencing all the thoughts swirling in the detective's mind. They tumbled onto the bed, quickly stripping off the last of their clothes, their bodies tangling together, skin against skin. The unexpected tryst didn't last long. Their moment of bliss was shattered at its peak. The wooden front door was kicked open with a loud bang. A blade of icy wind tore through the warm air inside within seconds. Heavy footsteps echoed on the floor as the intruder stormed in, bringing a gust of cold air with them. McCarthy and Kazuko didn't even have time to grab a sheet to cover themselves before the intruder reached the doorway of the den. McCarthy stared in utter shock at the woman standing there, Laura, holding a .38 caliber revolver in both hands, the dark barrel pointing straight at his face. Laura, no. Before he could finish speaking, Laura swung the gun around. Before Kazuko could let out a single scream, she fired 3 bullets into her bare chest. What happened next was surreal, beyond belief. 1 minute in heaven, the next in hell, That was exactly what McCarthy was experiencing. He watched it all unfold, powerless to stop it. Like water draining down a plug hole, all the pleasure was sucked away in seconds, leaving nothing but despair and death in its wake. Blood spread out beneath Kazuko's fallen body, quickly soaking half the bedsheet. At the same time, the revolver slipped from Laura's hand, clattering to the floor. She leaned against the doorframe, sliding down to the ground, tears pouring from her eyes. Silent sobs soon turned into loud, heaving wails. McCarthy scrambled out of bed, pulling on his shirt, pants, and shoes as fast as he could. He approached his wife cautiously, picking up the fallen gun and tucking it into the waistband of his pants at the small of his back. Then he wrapped his arms around her shoulders gently. Laura clung to his chest, sobbing even harder. The detective patted her back awkwardly, murmuring over and over, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." His wife gasped between sobs, speaking in broken sentences. "Ian, did I just ruin everything?" McCarthy held her tightly, unable to answer. He didn't even have the courage to glance back at the naked body on the bed, the woman he'd poured so much effort into saving, who'd been so close to surviving. But he couldn't blame his wife either. How had things ended up like this? Who was to blame? No one. Everyone had just gone a little too far. They didn't deserve this punishment. No one but that bastard Frank Kepler lying dead outside. He should have been the one to pay for all of this. Yes, that's exactly what he'd do. A plan began to form in the detective's mind. "Ian, I'm not a child. Don't give me those empty comforts. I want you to take me to the police station to turn myself in. I want you to promise me, don't bring the kids to court. Don't let them come visit me in prison. Look at me, honey. Listen to me carefully." McCarthy shook her shoulders. Laura finally stopped her rambling, her red, tear-swollen eyes staring blankly into her husband's. "Listen, honey, I'm not comforting you. I have a way to get us through this. Do exactly what I say, and you'll be fine. I promise. First, tell me how you found this place. I put a GPS tracker on your car." "Shit, where did you get something like that?" "I bought it from a private investigator, along with the gun," Laura mumbled. A wave of sadness washed over McCarthy. "You stopped trusting me a long time ago, didn't you? All right, now's not the time to argue about that. Did anyone know you were coming here? Did you tell the private investigator?" "No, I didn't tell anyone." "Good. That's perfect. Now go wait in the other room. Out there. Okay. No matter what happens, don't touch anything." Laura wiped the tears streaming down her face with both hands, then stood up, walking obediently out of the den, into the living room. A sharp gasp escaped her lips. She'd finally noticed Frank's body lying dead beside the sofa. Apparently, she hadn't paid any attention to the living room when she'd burst in 10 minutes earlier, ready to catch him in the act. "Don't touch anything," the detective called out loudly. He pulled the Colt revolver from his waist and set it on the floor at his feet. Walking over to the open closet, he pulled out a pair of plastic gloves and put them on. Then he stripped off his shirt, putting on a thermal undershirt instead, followed by the bulletproof vest, then his shirt and sweater again. He fastened his belt, pulled on his socks and shoes. Bending down, he picked up the Glock 18 service pistol lying on the floor, slipping it into the holster at his waist. Then he strapped the Glock 26, the one he'd given to Kazuko, to his left ankle. Once he was fully dressed, he picked up the revolver from the floor by the door, opened the cylinder, and emptied the remaining 3 bullets and the 3 spent casings. He carefully wiped all fingerprints off the gun and bullets, then reloaded the cylinder, tucking the revolver into the front of his waistband. He gathered up all of the Japanese woman's clothes, scattered across the bed and floor, into a pile. Glancing at the body on the bed, he whispered a final goodbye to the victim he'd ultimately failed to save. "I'm sorry, Kayla." Then he left the den. Outside, Laura had closed the splintered front door again, and the living room had regained its initial warmth. McCarthy tossed the bundle of clothes into the fireplace, prodding the flames with a poker. The fire blazed higher, filling the room with the acrid stench of burning wool. He put the poker back on the rack, then turned toward the killer's body. Stopping at the edge of the pool of blood, he knelt down, prying the Beretta from the corpse's hand and replacing it with the Colt revolver. Then he handed the Beretta, along with his service pistol and holster, to his stunned wife. "As you can see, this is the case I've been working on lately. This man is the killer. And the woman you shot was his third victim. I saved her, and she seduced me. It all happened so fast. 1 second earlier, I never would have dreamed of cheating on you. Believe me, honey, I'm telling you the truth." Laura stared into her husband's eyes, as if trying to detect a lie. But she found nothing. McCarthy held her shoulders, speaking to her in a tone more serious than ever before. "Honey, I need you to listen carefully. Take these 2 guns and get out of here immediately. Go home. Don't say a word about this to anyone. If someone asks, tell them I came home early this afternoon to help you prepare for our anniversary dinner. Then, right before we finished eating, I got a phone call and had to rush out. You don't know where I went. If they press you about where you went, tell them you were upset and went for a drive. Do exactly as I say, and I promise everything will be okay. Can you do that?" Laura nodded. "Repeat what I said to you, just to make sure. Go home right away. Don't tell anyone what happened. If someone asks, say you came home early to help me prepare for our anniversary dinner. Then, before dinner was over, you got a phone call and had to leave in a hurry. I don't know where you went. If they ask where I went, I'll say I was upset and went for a drive." Her voice trailed off, tears blurring her eyes again. McCarthy leaned down and kissed her. He helped her to the door, pulling it open. The wood splintered where she'd kicked it in. Laura stumbled outside. McCarthy hugged her again, whispering in her ear, "When all this is over, I'll tell you everything. On the beaches of Hawaii, I promise. Now go, honey. Be careful on the road." Watching Laura drive away in her Mazda, disappearing onto the highway beyond the woods, the detective turned back and entered the cabin. He pushed the broken door shut, then picked up the cordless phone from the coffee table and dialed his own cell phone number. This was a crucial step in his flawless plan. The distress call needed to be made at the right time. He pressed the call button on his cell phone and started counting. 9 seconds later, he hung up. Then he began erasing all traces of Laura's presence. Fingerprints, hair, clothing fibers, and the tire tracks from the Mazda outside, which he'd cover up with his Ford Mercury's tracks. Fortunately, Laura hadn't wandered far, and the den was well stocked with cleaning supplies. Erasing evidence of her visit wouldn't be hard. Besides the biological evidence that needed special treatment, on the bed and inside Kazuko's body, all other traces of his own presence could be explained as part of his crime scene investigation. No need to clean those up. He would, however, need to fire the Glock 26 once to pass the GSR test, the gunshot residue test that detects whether someone has fired a gun, then wipe the remaining gunpowder traces from Kazuko's hands. Injecting bleach into her vagina would be the hardest part of the process, but McCarthy was confident he could handle it. The coin killer had already set everything up perfectly for him. All he had to do was recreate it all exactly as it should have been. In the dead of night on Thursday, February 5th, this remote vacation cabin on the outskirts of Pittsburgh suddenly became the busiest place in the entire city. The first police officers to arrive called for backup. Soon after, word spread, and a flood of people descended on the scene. Dozens of marked and unmarked police cars, sedans, and SUVs, one after another, cordoning off the area completely. The chaos didn't die down until the mayor's office spokesperson arrived in a Mercedes and the assistant district attorney showed up in a BMW. To keep a low profile, only one searchlight was set up to illuminate the area in front of the cabin. Junior officers were posted around the perimeter to keep the relentless media at bay. McCarthy watched as the city's bigwigs gathered, speaking in hushed, urgent tones, as if raising their voices would leak the secret. A detective working on a serial murder case turning out to be the killer himself. It was a national headline for the media, but a devastating scandal for the Pittsburgh Police Department and City Hall. Whoever ended up taking the blame would likely see their political career come to an abrupt end. The big shots were panicking over who would get stuck holding the bag, so it came as no surprise to the detective that no one had come to take his detailed statement yet. Either way, he was set to play the role of the hero. His position was the least precarious of anyone present. Leaning casually against the doorframe, McCarthy watched as these men inevitably trampled all over the crime scene, while the forensics team, clad in Tyvek suits, muttered curses under their breath as they tried to salvage the evidence they valued so dearly. Things were unfolding exactly as he'd predicted, even better, in fact. He thought of the chief, still in Florida. He must have gotten the news by now, pacing around like a caged animal, calling every airline in a frenzy to find the earliest flight back to Pittsburgh. Missing this grand party would probably be the worst thing that happened to him all year. Then he saw Jason Gregg. The detective's second class slipped on shoe covers and stepped into the crime scene. He stared in disbelief at the body of his former partner, lying dead on the floor for hours. The assistant medical examiner and forensic technicians worked busily around the corpse, paying no attention to the onlooker. Only McCarthy noticed his old friend. The mixture of dejection and shock on Jason's face was plain to see. He had every reason to be in a bad mood, the detective thought. If Jason hadn't turned off his phone at the critical moment, he would have been here to share the glory of solving the serial murder case. Bad luck had cost him another shot at promotion, and had even made McCarthy suspect he was the killer for a while. Maybe it wasn't just bad luck, though. Thinking back to Jason's lackadaisical attitude during the witness interviews, McCarthy couldn't help but feel a twinge of schadenfreude. He was about to walk over to greet his old friend, who was clearly having a terrible day, when someone stepped in front of him. "Hey, Ian, where do you think you're going? I need a word with you." It was none other than Deputy Chief Kevin Snepps, the burly African-American senior officer who dominated McCarthy's field of vision in an instant. Known for his decisive action and sharp judgment, Snepps had maintained a 90% case clearance rate during his time in robbery homicide, a record that still stood today. His talents extended beyond detective work to navigating police department politics. He'd risen from a beat cop to the second-in-command of the Pittsburgh Police Department in just 9 years. "Sorry, sir. I was just going to say hello to Detective Jason Gregg. He's also working on this case. I wanted to talk to him. Sean Myers will talk to him. Your priority right now is to talk to me. Headquarters is on high alert about this case. I'm taking full charge of the follow-up investigation into these serial murders. I'll be taking your statement personally. Let's get started." And so McCarthy began recounting the story he'd rehearsed countless times in his head to the deputy chief. "Yes, sir. All the investigation up until Monday is thoroughly documented in the case file, so I'll skip over that and start from Tuesday. At the time, I was searching for potential victims by accessing the Siri system. During my search, I came across a familiar face, the victim, Kazuko Hamada. Her physical characteristics matched our victim profile perfectly, so I paid her a visit." "Wait a minute. You're saying you knew the victim before today?" "Yes. She ran an eBay store selling various tickets and discount coupons. I've patronized her shop a few times, bought some concert tickets and coupons from her." With Kazuko dead, there was no way to disprove his story. The deputy chief pressed the pause button on his voice recorder lightly, but the small gesture didn't escape McCarthy's notice. "You went to see the victim on Monday? Did you disclose details of the case to her?" "Yes, just the part about how the killer selects his victims. I also suggested she accept police protection, but she refused. She thought she could take care of herself. So I left her my business card and cell phone number." "Detective McCarthy, this is a violation of department protocol." "I'm sorry, sir, but at the time, all our leads had gone cold. I had no other choice. In fact, based on the victim profile, I'd compiled a preliminary list of potential targets using Siri's data and was planning to assign officers to visit each one, hoping to warn the next potential victim. Starting with Kazuko was just a personal choice." "All right, let's not dwell on that. Continue." Deputy Chief Kevin pressed the record button again. His reaction was exactly what McCarthy had expected. To weather this crisis, the police department was eager to promote a super detective image. They wouldn't let a minor protocol violation stand in the way. And the scheduled visit to Maybrick Medical Devices before the murder would come to light eventually. There was no point in hiding it. "Today is my 15th wedding anniversary with my wife Laura. I left work early to go home and celebrate with her. In the evening, I received a call from the victim. She asked if I was free to grab dinner. Sounded like a date. I told her it was our anniversary. I got a second call from her right before we finished dinner, around 9 o'clock. The call was made from the landline in this cabin, not her cell phone. She sounded terrified on the phone, saying someone was trying to kill her, and gave me a rough idea of where she was. The call cut off midway. I rushed out immediately and found this place about 40 minutes later." 40 minutes? Why didn't you ask the Intelligence and Resources Unit to trace the call?" "I was in such a hurry. I left without my code or service weapon." I used my personal sidearm to take down the suspect, a Glock 26 subcompact. It's a reliable backup gun. You know, the one I carry on my ankle. I just followed the directions she gave me on the phone, didn't think twice about it. Turns out that was a mistake. Her sense of distance was way off. But by then, I didn't have time to call for backup. Besides, I'd already begun to suspect the killer had strong ties to the police department. I couldn't take the risk. What made you suspect the killer was a cop? Series. I'd been racking my brain for weeks trying to figure out how the killer was selecting his victims. I initially thought he was using social media like Facebook, posing as an eBay buyer to gain their trust before attacking. But those platforms either require too much personal information, leaving too many traces, or they don't have the detailed physical description search function the killer needed, or they can't be linked to eBay. Today, when I was reviewing the series data, it hit me. For the killer, this police database was the perfect tool. To be honest, the thought scared me half to death. If it was true, then the killer was either a high-ranking detective or had very close connections to the police force. Hardly any civilians even know this database exists. You found this place. What happened next? I kicked the door open. From the doorway, I could see the killer's back in the den. He was staging the crime scene. Be specific. I think he was injecting bleach into the victim's vagina with a syringe. Did you recognize him as Detective Frank Kepler at the time? No, I didn't. He had his back to me. When I kicked the door open, he jumped up off the floor immediately and ran into the living room to grab his gun. I fired before I even got a good look at his face. And hell, even if I had recognized that bastard, I still would have pulled the trigger. What happened after that? Did you call for backup right away? No. First, I confirmed the identities of the killer and the victim. Then I examined the crime scene, confirming he was indeed the coin killer I'd been hunting. Only then did I call the department's emergency line. How did you confirm he was the coin killer? The crime scene was set up exactly like the previous two murders, the coins on the eyes, the bleach in the vagina. But this victim was shot to death, unlike the first two, who were strangled. What's your take on that? This victim was different from the others. She wasn't defenseless. From what I know, she's a black belt in karate. I think the killer tried to strangle her, but she fought back fiercely. He had no choice but to use his gun. All right, Detective McCarthy. One last question. Why didn't you call Detective Jason Gregg, who's also working on this case, for backup when you left? Don't blame me for that. The detective laughed. I did try to call him, but his phone was turned off. In fact, he was my #1 suspect at the time. Kevin Snepps laughed too. McCarthy knew he'd pulled it off. Even though it was still a freezing winter night, McCarthy could almost feel the warm Hawaiian breeze on his skin and see Laura's curvy figure in a bikini lying on the beach. Jason Gregg strode briskly down the police station corridor. There were only 5 minutes left until the press conference, but he suddenly realized that he had forgotten to turn the surveillance cameras and microphones back on when he left, and foolishly, he had even left his cell phone behind for him. Damn it. He had partnered with Ian McCarthy for 9 years and knew exactly how capable his old partner was. Without a doubt, McCarthy was a brilliant detective. Even without luck, the position of Homicide Unit Chief would have been his sooner or later. It was just that this time, he had been struck by an unbelievable streak of bad luck. What was even more worrying was that McCarthy had grown up in the roughest neighborhood in the city. Who knew if he had some trick up his sleeve, like using parts from a cell phone to pick his shackles and escape? Or if he had some underworld connections who would risk everything to break him out? During the years they worked together, many cases had been solved thanks to the contacts he had made back in those hellish streets. Leaving him alone in an unsupervised interrogation room was extremely dangerous. He was just one step away from success. He couldn't afford to mess things up at the last minute. He had already reached the corridor where Interrogation Room 3, McCarthy's temporary holding cell, was located. The guard was still standing dutifully at the door. Yet just a few yards away, the door to the interrogation room swung open, and a stranger with black hair and East Asian features stepped out. Hey, stop right there. Who are you? Jason halted abruptly and barked the question. He's McCarthy's lawyer, officer. The guard replied on the man's behalf. Lawyer? Are you Nicholas Gu? No, you're not. Jason's eyes had already locked onto a series of faint, dark stains on the man's dark suit. They looked like They looked like high-velocity blood splatters. Jason immediately reached for his gun, but the man was faster. A black combination lock briefcase came hurtling straight at his face. He was forced to duck, and the two wild shots he fired in his haste hit nothing but the ceiling. When he straightened up again, the guard was lying on the floor clutching his throat, blood spraying across the wall behind him. The Asian man had vanished without a trace. There were no windows in the corridor. He couldn't have escaped anywhere. Jason darted into the cramped interrogation room 3. The imposter lawyer was gone. Ian McCarthy was slumped forward in his chair, his body teetering on the verge of sliding off. His orange prison uniform had been dyed a deep brown by blood, which had pooled into a small lake at his feet. It was clear that his life had drained away along with that blood long ago. No. How could this have happened? The coin killer was already dead. Who else would want him dead? Jason leaned in to examine McCarthy's body. His throat had been slit wide open. Suddenly, the police station's alarm blared to life. Jason flipped the switches on the wall to turn the cameras and microphones back on, then shouted into the intercom. "This is Jason Gregg. My suspect and I were attacked. 1 man down. Send an ambulance, now. Interrogation room 3. I need backup." The voice that crackled back was just as panicked as his own. "We can't spare anyone. The station's under attack by a group of ninjas. I repeat, the station is under attack by ninjas." Ninjas? What the hell was going on? "Jason, watch out behind you." Jason spun around violently. A dark figure lunged at him from behind the door. He stared in horror as he realized he couldn't squeeze the trigger. His index finger had been severed and was now stuck in the trigger guard of his gun. He opened his mouth to scream, but the cry died in his throat instantly. The man in front of him was wearing an expensive suit, but his face was concealed by a black silk scarf. A cyan-colored dagger plunged upward from the soft flesh under Jason's jaw, slicing through his trachea, blood vessels, and vertebrae in one swift, brutal motion. In the last few seconds of his life, Jason Gregg suddenly understood something. He was no smarter than Ian McCarthy. No luckier, either. No one could escape the timequake once it had them in its grasp. Professor's notes. 3 days after the ninja raid on the Pittsburgh Police Department, the professor was found dead in his cell at Ashcliffe Hospital for the criminally insane, an apparent suicide. The coroner determined that he had suffocated himself with a plastic bag. Among his personal effects, hidden on the last page of a Bible, investigators found 5 names scrawled in black ink: Jack Daniels, Ian McCarthy, Jason Gregg, Nicholas Gu, and his own name, Kilgore Trout. Each name had been crossed out with a thick line. Below them was a single phrase, Timequake, followed by a string of numbers and letters that looked like a username and password, though no one could figure out what they were for. At first, I thought I was the chosen one, the lucky recipient of God's most generous gift. With the Timequake, I could become the only person in the world who could predict the markets. I knew nothing about stocks or futures before, but once you can see the future, those things become child's play. I began to imagine what my life would be like with piles of money. Traveling the world? No, I was already too old for that sort of thing. Maybe I'd buy a beach house with a dock in the warm South, along with a yacht, and stock the bar with enough liquor to last me 10 years. That was my dream back when I was in college. But the sad truth is, there would be no bikini-clad girls on the deck, no wife in a flowing chiffon dress holding our child's hand. No one to share any of it with. Ever since Angela tore me apart in that long, painful divorce 6 years ago, I've never had any illusions left about love. I've dated a few women since then, but each time was worse than the last. Now, I have no interest in those frumpy old ladies who don't even get dirty jokes, and young girls are far too dangerous for an old fossil like me. I can't even imagine what would be left of my life if I quit my job at the university. God, what am I even writing about? Sometimes I wonder, if I can carry memories of the future back to before the timequake and change it, then what does that future in my memories even mean? Perhaps only a line from T.S. Eliot can describe this situation perfectly. Time present and time past / are both perhaps present in time future / and time future contained in time past. I think I need to seriously consider whether I should make my discovery public, even if it would win me a Nobel Prize. I can't imagine what would happen to the world if everyone gained the power to rewrite history. I suspect that if that ever came to pass, the only thing that could save human society from collapsing would be if God really does exist. But on the other hand, who am I to keep this discovery from humanity? Maybe things wouldn't be so bad. Why do I have to be the one to make this choice? It would be naive to assume I'm the only person in the world who's noticed the timequakes. I think I'll stop dwelling on this for now. My student Michael brought me some Chinese tea. I suspect a cup or two might help clear these troubling thoughts from my mind. There's an old tree in my backyard. I'm not a botanist, so I don't know what kind it is. I only know it was planted long before I was born. Ever since the wave of suburbanization swept the city in the 1950s, it has narrowly escaped being cut down by property developers several times. Now, it's the oldest resident in the entire neighborhood. When I was a child, my father built me a treehouse in its branches. Over the years, the tree's growth has torn the treehouse apart, but the ladder nailed to the trunk for climbing is still intact. So the neighborhood kids always try to sneak up there when I'm not looking, just to leave their mark. Eventually, I had to get a Great Dane to guard the tree and scare those kids away. Danny was the kid from the Greenwood family across the street. Probably because of his asthma, he was smaller and thinner than the other kids his age, and I never saw him playing basketball or baseball with the neighborhood boys. He always wore a full tracksuit, but he could only sit on the bleachers and watch. Like the other kids, he kept trying to find a way to climb up to my treehouse, but he was always chased off by my dog, Bobby. He was probably the only kid in the neighborhood who never managed to make it up there. The most recent attempt, Simon, the naughtiest boy in the bunch, stole 2 sleeping pills from his mom's medicine cabinet, mixed them into a piece of meat, and fed it to Bobby. His plan was to let Danny climb the treehouse while the dog was asleep. But either human sleeping pills don't work on dogs, or the dose wasn't strong enough. Danny had only climbed 2 rungs when Bobby woke up and started barking furiously at him. He got so scared that he fell off the ladder and wet his pants. It made him the laughingstock of the school, and he couldn't hold his head up for a whole week. Then the timequake happened. Time rewound 9 days. I thought, maybe I should help this kid. So on the day they were planning to drug my dog, I brought Bobby inside early. But things didn't go the way I'd planned. Instead, it turned into a tragedy. While Danny was carving his name into the treehouse, he stepped on a rotting plank, lost his balance, and fell from the top of the tree. He broke 3 ribs, damaged his right kidney, and shattered his hip into 4 pieces. And I'm now facing a $500,000 lawsuit. This was the first time I realized how dangerous the timequake could be. I call it the first shock. From that moment on, I knew I had to be extremely careful, or the timequake would destroy my life. But I still couldn't bring myself to believe that the timequake wasn't a blessing. It was a punishment from God. March 11th. On this day, you can read about the Kimberly lingerie store sign collapse in the newspapers and see it on TV. At the flagship Kimberly store at the intersection of Jefferson Road and 7th Avenue, workers were reinstalling the neon sign when the hoisting rope snapped. The giant metal frame shaped like a lingerie model fell 3 stories and crashed onto the sidewalk. At this busy downtown intersection, this serious accident miraculously caused no casualties. Only a few pedestrians were frightened. Several customers were briefly trapped inside the store before the fallen sign was removed. That's what people would remember reading. But I carry another version of events in my mind. Teenage girl killed by falling store sign. In the original timeline before the timequake, I watched that girl get crushed by the falling metal model with my own eyes. It was the most gruesome sight I had ever seen in my life. Her body split open from her left shoulder, her upper half almost sliced in 2 by the metal frame. At least half the women shopping for lingerie inside the store fainted on the spot. In fact, the first ambulances to arrive took those fragile, unconscious women away, not the poor girl's body lying on the sidewalk. For an entire month after time rewound, I was torn about whether to warn that girl, Amelia, about the sign accident. In the end, on the day before the accident, I called her from a payphone. I left a short, anonymous warning and hung up before she could say anything in response. I was careful. The payphone was at least 10 blocks away from both my home and the university where I worked, so I wouldn't get dragged into the accident investigation. The next day, I still took my usual route to work. When I passed in front of the Kimberly store, I made a point of scanning the area. I didn't see Amelia anywhere, but that little act of caution got me into some trouble. I was so focused on looking for her that I didn't notice when the sign started to fall. By the time I reacted, it was too late. To avoid being hit by the sign crashing down above me, I had to dart into the Kimberly lingerie store. The fallen sign blocked the front door. When the ambulances, reporters, and cameramen all arrived at once, I suddenly found myself in an extremely awkward situation. I was the only male customer trapped inside the lingerie store. One of the reporters even interviewed me. Oh, damn it. For the entire semester after that, my female colleagues avoided me like the plague. The students spread rumors that I was a pervert who stole women's underwear. As for the neighbors, even though I explained the whole story at the weekend house parties, the parents stopped letting their kids come anywhere near my house. Even though things turned out so embarrassingly, I took comfort in the fact that I had saved that girl's life. But then, just a few days later, I saw her obituary on the social and crime page of the weekend newspaper. The police had found the body of a young woman in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Her limbs had been broken, and her body stuffed into a discarded oil drum. The victim was identified as 16-year-old Amelia Linkletter, who had been reported missing a few days earlier. According to her parents, she had received a mysterious phone call shortly before she disappeared. God, things are starting to go terribly wrong. Horribly wrong. At my 40-year high school reunion, I ran into Carl Manning. Back in high school, he was an unpopular nerd. While the rest of us argued about whether the cheerleading captain was a Cancer or a Leo, he'd go on and on about the Leonid meteor shower. I still remember clearly. He ordered a high school nuclear power plant model kit from some catalog. He messed up the assembly so badly that his entire family had to undergo radiation sickness treatment for over 2 months. State troopers evacuated everyone within a 2-mile radius of his house. Experts dressed like astronauts, along with FBI and Homeland Security agents, were coming and going from his home and hospital room nonstop. In the end, they had no choice but to tear his house down and build a concrete slab over the site. Now Carl is the president's science advisor. I made up an excuse about writing a science fiction novel and asked him some questions about cosmology and time machines. If we could go back in time, could we change history? His answer was more or less the same as what I'd read online. Time is just a tool humans use to understand the universe, like the Cartesian coordinate system. It doesn't actually exist. A time machine, on the other hand, could be understood as a device that reverses the state of all matter, turning it back to a previous condition. The amount of energy required to do that is beyond human comprehension. Einstein's mass-energy equation reveals the energy contained in a single gram of matter, E equals mc squared. That energy is staggering, but even if we converted every single particle of matter in the entire solar system into energy, it still wouldn't be enough to turn back time. What about the energy of the entire universe? I asked him. Then I explained my idea about the instantaneous contraction of the universe. I saw the look of surprise on his face. Carl was probably shocked that a lowly humanities professor like me could come up with such an interesting idea. He thought about it for a long time before giving me a fascinating answer. Such a thing might indeed be possible. For some reason we don't yet understand, the universe could spontaneously revert to a previous state, then continue expanding along a different path than before. According to chaos theory, the next state of the universe is an emergent phenomenon. There are no strict cause and effect rules governing it. So in that case, changing history would be possible. But even if that happened, it would still follow the universe's inherent laws. For example, when the universe contracts and then expands again to the exact point before contraction, the entropy must be even higher than before. Because if it weren't, we would be able to observe a slowdown in the universe's expansion rate. But so far, humans have detected no such slowdown. In fact, he explained, entropy increase is the fundamental law of the entire universe. Chaos, destruction, and decay are inevitable fates. Localized examples of entropy decrease, like human society, are extremely rare anomalies. In an entropy shift on the scale of universal contraction, even our local entropy decreasing system of human society would have to submit to the universe's overall trajectory. In other words, if humanity were to go extinct before the universe contracts, we would have no power to reverse our own fate. So things can only get worse? And any attempt to make them better is futile? I asked. You could put it that way, Carl replied. I think he was right. All the terrible things that have happened after the timequakes can be explained by this theory. That insurance salesman who won the lottery and then disappeared. He probably didn't move into a beach house in Santa Fe. Something terrible must have happened to him. That was probably the most depressing piece of news I've heard since I first became aware of the timequakes. The timequake really is God's sledgehammer. No, there will be no Nobel Prize for me. I must keep the timequakes a secret. If this information gets out, if more people find out about it, Judgment Day will come early. This is the fourth time I've discovered a discrepancy in the cause of death before and after a timequake. Someone who was supposed to die in an accident ended up being murdered after time rewound. The serial killer hiding behind the timequakes clearly understands their nature far better than I do. If trying to make fate take a better turn is nothing but futile, then he might as well make it darker and more chaotic. I can only stand by and watch him kill those innocent people, unable to do anything to stop him. No, actually, I'm not completely powerless. I can't save those victims, but at least I can eliminate the killer. I don't think the universe will mind one more casualty of the timequake. Of course, first I have to find him. I'm no legendary detective like Matthew Scudder or Harry Bosch, nor am I a criminal profiler with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. I've never received any training in tracking people, surveillance, or criminal investigation. I have no connections in the police force. I don't even have a gun permit. But don't underestimate a literature professor. Because Angela was a technology columnist, I've always been familiar with all those high-tech gadgets. Even though she was a cheating wife, an unsympathetic, penny-pinching ex-wife, a beautiful but utterly destructive woman, I've always loved reading her tech column, even after our divorce. I know exactly where to buy the latest surveillance equipment: pinhole cameras, micro cameras, wireless microphones, small RAID servers for storing surveillance data, GPS trackers. My other advantage is that I know he exists, while he has no idea I'm onto him. He would probably even refuse to acknowledge my existence, just to feel safe. He would tell himself that anyone else who's noticed the timequakes would have already destroyed themselves chasing the temptation to change fate. If I were him, I'd lie to myself the same way. I started reading every single obituary and death notice in the newspaper every day. I'd read each one a dozen times until I had it memorized word for word. I originally thought that as long as I could use the timequakes to identify potential victims, finding the serial killer wouldn't be that difficult. But things turned out to be far more complicated than I expected. Putting aside all the timequakes where nothing happened at all, which still wasted a huge amount of my energy, even for the timequakes that became my case studies, if the time rewind was too short, the victim would be dead before I could even find them. And for the timequakes that gave me enough time to locate the potential victim, who would die soon after, my clumsy surveillance skills were next to useless. In fact, on several occasions, I nearly got myself into trouble by following the victims. Eavesdropping was completely out of the question. I tried setting up high-definition cameras along their usual routes to monitor their movements. It was easy, just like in Hollywood movies. As long as you wear a uniform bought from a thrift store and drive a van painted with a municipal construction company logo, no one will ever suspect a thing. But the footage from those so-called high-definition cameras was only barely watchable during the day. At night, the image quality degraded to the point of being completely unrecognizable. As for infrared surveillance systems that work at night, not only do you need a special license to buy them, but their exorbitant price tags and complicated installation processes are way beyond what I can afford. I collected the names and background information of all the victims. I cleared an entire wall in my study and pinned up all the information to create a clue map. After that, I never hosted another weekend house party again, and I stopped attending parties at my neighbors' and colleagues' homes. The invitations quickly dried up until no one invited me anywhere at all. In their eyes, I must have become a reclusive, weird old pervert. The killer almost never passes up an opportunity to strike. The bodies of some victims are found quickly, while others simply disappear. Even though their bodies are never recovered, I know they're dead for sure. The bodies that are found quickly are all killed with clean, efficient methods: strangulation or slitting of the throat. There are no signs of sexual assault or torture on the bodies. I believe these victims are just his practice targets. The victims who truly interest him always disappear for a long time. Some of the bodies hidden in remote locations are only discovered by pure chance, like the 19-year-old Mexican-American boy, one Sergio Manuel, who was tied up and dumped in a river inside a car trunk. Only those victims can truly reveal the killer's terrifying, dark personality. They are usually sexually assaulted and tortured, their bodies bearing signs of prolonged suffering and broken bones. To understand him better, I checked out dozens of books on criminal psychology and serial killer profiling from the library, trying to create a psychological portrait of the killer. But so far, all this work has yielded little progress. And yet, this isn't even the most unbearable part of it all. Every minute I spend working on this investigation, I'm violating every moral principle I've held my entire life. I know these people are going to be murdered, but I can't warn them. Getting involved in any way could get me killed too. On one hand, I hope for more effective case studies to work with. On the other hand, every time a timequake happens, I pray that there won't be another serial murder, that those poor people will just die in their accidents and be done with it. God, even Odysseus had it easier than me. Before I completely lose my mind, I know I have to end this soon, either by succeeding or by finally giving up. It wasn't until Bella, the prostitute who was supposed to die of a drug overdose, disappeared that I realized my tracking methods were completely useless. Death, that's the code name I've given him, since I don't know his real name yet, prefers to target kids from the bottom of society, young prostitutes, students exploited by drug dealers, the children of illegal immigrants. They have high mortality rates, no fixed addresses, and completely irregular lives. They're extremely difficult to track. I have to change my approach if I ever hope to find him. I learned from a criminal psychology textbook that serial killers have a high chance of returning to their crime scenes. The environmental stimuli allow them to relive the pleasure they felt while committing the murders. But Death is far too cautious to take that risk. However, besides his murder scenes, there's another hidden scene only he knows about, the accident scenes from before the timequake. For him, those places can trigger the same twisted fantasies. He believes that no one else in the world knows about those scenes except him. He doesn't have to sneak back there under the cover of night to avoid police surveillance, savoring the moment for just a few brief seconds. He can go there in broad daylight, stay as long as he wants, even sit down for a cup of coffee, and enjoy himself until the pleasure fades completely. After a timequake, setting up cameras to monitor every single accident scene will be my last shot. It's worth the risk. The entire surveillance operation took me 10 months to set up. I bought 6 large-capacity hard drives just to store all the video footage. In the end, I was certain I had him. That man appeared in the surveillance footage from every single accident scene following a murder. He was in his early 40s, with gray hair, white. His appearance, build, and clothing were all completely ordinary, but every time he was there, he looked utterly satisfied. Bastard. He always drove different cars, sometimes a Ford Taurus, sometimes a Toyota Camry, sometimes a Chrysler Sebring. Always the kind of big sedan that's popular with middle-class Americans. I checked all the license plate numbers. He was careful. All right, every single one of those cars was rented. October 9th. The weather had just started to turn cool, and I finally got my chance to unmask Death. Another girl had disappeared. Then he showed up in the surveillance footage at the accident scene, driving a Chevrolet Malibu. This time, he actually bought donuts and coffee. He leaned against the car and ate everything, then lingered for another 10 minutes before leaving. If I could rent that car as quickly as possible, I was sure I could find his fingerprints on it. From the footage, it looked like he hadn't been wearing gloves. The next day, I took the whole day off work. I arrived bright and early at Alamo Rent-A-Car, the rental company he seemed to prefer. I told the receptionist I wanted to look around their parking lot to pick out a car I liked. He agreed happily. The parking lot was almost the size of a football field, with about 30 cars parked there, mostly big sedans like the ones he drove. I walked from the east end of the lot to the west, then back again. Damn it. The Chevrolet Malibu wasn't there. I froze, at a loss for what to do next. The receptionist smiled and asked, "Didn't find anything you like, sir?" "I'll keep looking," I mumbled in response. He stood there watching me until I was about 5 meters away, then pulled out his cell phone and made a call. When Death walked toward me, I froze completely. He was smiling from ear to ear. His casual jacket had been replaced with a crisp suit and shiny leather shoes. but I recognized him instantly. The man walking toward me was the same killer who had appeared in the surveillance footage from 8 different scenes. I sucked in a sharp breath, then did my best to look calm and natural. He held out his hand. Shaking hands with a serial killer I'd been tracking for 3 years was the most revolting thing I'd ever done in my life. Jack Daniels. I'm the manager here. How can I help you? Mark Weber. I lied, making up a name on the spot. Now that I knew who he was, there was no point in showing him my driver's license to rent a car. I just wanted to rent a car. Nothing important. Is that so, Mr. Weber? He raised an eyebrow. My colleague said you've been walking around the lot for quite a while. It looks to me like you're looking for a specific car. Oh no. I tipped him off. I had to get out of there before he saw through my disguise completely. You know what? I don't think I'm going to rent a car here after all. Your attitude is terrible. I complained loudly, turning to leave. What exactly are you looking for? Are you a private investigator? Mark Weber. I pushed open the glass door, separating the parking lot from the office building. His voice rang out behind me. He emphasized the name, making it clear he'd seen through my fake identity. Bastard. Old fox. I had to get out of there fast. When I think back on it now, that first confrontation was a total disaster. I practically ran away with my tail between my legs. But I couldn't just give up. I took a long, roundabout route back to my car, which I'd parked 200 meters west of the Alamo rent-a-car office. I made sure no one was following me before I got in. Since I'd already taken the whole day off work anyway, I decided to keep the rental company under surveillance. Things went much smoother than I'd expected. In hindsight, far too smooth. The kind of smooth that makes you let your guard down. I only waited about 10 minutes before I saw the Chevrolet Malibu drive out of the company's front gate. He must have been in a hurry to dispose of the body. I was sure of it. I'd bet my life that the missing girl's body was still in the trunk. Even if there was no body, there would be plenty of evidence. Bloodstains, hair, fabric fibers. I'd moved too quickly for him. He must not have had time to clean the car thoroughly. It started to rain. In that season, the rain quickly turned into a downpour. The sound of raindrops pounding against my windshield was loud enough to drown out the engine noise. I began to worry if my driving skills were good enough to follow Death's car in such heavy rain. But he drove slowly in front of me, not seeming to be in any hurry at all. I followed him for about 10 miles. We got onto the ramp leading to the Fort Pitt Bridge. Once we crossed the bridge, it would take us through the Fort Pitt Tunnel and out of the city. He started to speed up. No? Once we were out of the city limits, it would be the jurisdiction of the Highway Patrol. Who knew how long it would take them to respond in this weather? On the empty highway, it would be nearly impossible for me to stop him. I had to intercept him while the bridge was still crowded with traffic. Then he wouldn't be able to escape. Yes, cause a traffic accident to stop him. If it was serious enough to call the police and a tow truck, he'd be finished. I double-checked that my seatbelt was fastened tightly. Then I jerked the steering wheel hard to the left, switching lanes. At the same time, I slammed my right foot down on the gas pedal as hard as I could. The tachometer needle shot to the right. The engine's scream drowned out the sound of the rain again. My car surged forward, closing in on the Chevrolet ahead. I gritted my teeth. When my car was half a length ahead of the Chevrolet, I turned on my right turn signal, then jerked the steering wheel one full turn to the right. That car crash was nothing like I'd planned. I'd been tailing Death the entire time. With his level of vigilance, he must have noticed me long ago. Before I hit him, I turned on my right turn signal, warning him that I was going to crash into him. He should have understood what I was trying to do. He should have hit the brakes immediately. But I didn't hear any screech of brakes at all. The Chevrolet slammed into the right side of my car at 60 miles per hour. My right window shattered instantly. The rearview mirror was smashed into my windshield, spiderwebbing the glass completely. The impact flipped my car over. I watched in horror as the world spun around me, breaking into pieces. My overturned car skidded along on its roof, crossing one lane, then slammed into the concrete barrier in the middle of the bridge. The deploying airbag slammed my suspended body back into the seat with tremendous force. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I came to, the rescue workers hadn't managed to pull me out of the car yet. I unbuckled my seatbelt, and my head hit the roof of the car hard. My vision was blurry. My left shoulder and arm were nothing but excruciating pain. I must have broken something. I gasped for breath, carefully adjusting my position, waiting for my vision to clear. The right side of the car was almost completely crushed. I'd never be able to get out that way. I gritted my teeth against the searing pain in my left side and struggled to push open the left door with my right hand. Just then, someone came over to help me. Even with a moderate concussion, I'm certain I didn't hear any brakes screeching that day. The accident investigators found no skid marks either. That's why the police didn't find me fully responsible for the crash. The police mechanic thought there might have been something wrong with the Chevrolet's brakes and didn't rule out the possibility of tampering. In other words, they suspected it might have been an attempted murder. But that would never be proven, not with the car completely destroyed. Back then, as they pulled me out of the wreckage and onto a stretcher, I begged the paramedics to wheel me closer to the Chevrolet. They told me I shouldn't look, but I insisted. Damn it. Even though I'd nearly killed myself doing it, I'd finally taken you down, you devil. The left side of the Chevrolet's engine compartment had crumpled like an accordion, only half its original length. The driver was trapped in the mangled cockpit, covered in blood, his head lolling to the side. He looked dead. Firefighters were using the jaws of life to cut through the steering wheel, trying to get him out. But half the steering wheel was already embedded in his chest. My heart sank like a stone. He wasn't Jack Daniels at all. He had blonde hair. I'd been tricked. I'd killed an innocent man. In the last moment before they wheeled me into the ambulance, I turned my head to glance at the Chevrolet's popped trunk. It was completely empty. I had a fractured scapula, a broken left upper arm, a cracked rib, and 22 stitches in my face, along with a moderate concussion. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital. During that time, the police came to question me twice. It was more of an interrogation than an information-gathering session. They didn't leave me alone until they were convinced I had absolutely no connection to the Chevrolet driver. They never mentioned anything about my visit to the rental company that morning. Clearly, Jack Daniels hadn't breathed a word about my visit. He wanted nothing to do with the police. When I was discharged from the hospital, my left arm was still in a sling, throbbing with pain. I was told I had to go to the police station first to handle the paperwork for the traffic accident. Then I could pick up my car. That pile of twisted metal that had killed an innocent man. Let it rot there for all I cared. No, don't shift the blame, Kilgore Trout. You're the one who killed him. I dragged my aching, exhausted, and guilt-ridden body back home. When I opened the front door, a putrid stench of rot and blood hit me, making me gag. I flipped on the light switch. What greeted my eyes was Bobby's dried-up corpse, surrounded by dark brown bloodstains on the floor. I slammed the door shut, stumbled into the bathroom, and knelt over the toilet, vomiting violently until only bitter bile came up. He killed my dog. I stumbled back into the living room. A piece of paper was taped to the TV screen with clear packing tape. A single sentence was printed on it in bold, black letters. Don't fuck with me. You don't have what it takes. It was a warning. And it also meant that we now knew each other's identities. That note and Bobby's dead body, their message was clear. He wanted to scare me off. And if I backed down now, and if I was lucky enough not to die in some accident before the next timequake, he had no intention of coming after me. Maybe I would have been scared off if he hadn't killed my dog.